We meet at the University Hospital Liverpool Group Board of Directors. Welcome to the public. We're just here to observe and engage with our visitors today. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for your interest. I have apologies from Heather Barnett, from Matt Connor, from Jim Gardner, from Siobhan Roberts, two non-executive directors, Jackie Bird and Sue Ray. I welcome today David White, who's here representing the Deputy Chief Medical Officer here representing Jim Gardner, and Pip, many times representing Heather. You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. We start with the staff story about staff networks.
Yeah, I'll start off, Chair. So obviously today, back in mid-May, it was the Staff Networks, the National Staff Networks Day. And on that day, we heard some inspiring stories from across both Love and Liverpool Women's about the work that the staff networks do. And we wanted to bring some of the excellent work and celebrate some of the work, but also some of the challenges that the staff networks have to the board as a staff story. So, as you know, we spent quite a lot of time in both organisations developing these staff networks. They provide a safe space for colleagues to connect, share lived experience, but also to support each other. And what you'll hear on some of the experiences today is the crucial role that they play within both organisations in promoting equality, celebrating diversity, and amplifying the voice of the unrepresented groups. So, the other thing later on in the year, we're going to be doing some workshops with all of the chairs from all of our networks, and going to come and meet with board members to share some of the developments that they're doing further, so that we can talk through how does that work with the executive sponsors, what more support do our networks need. So,
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Chair. So just a very quick addition, really, before I introduce our colleagues who joined us to kind of take us through a short presentation. The board will remember back in April that we shared with you the ED&I annual plan and the look back, and there was some recognition around the successes of the ED&I plan, but in particular staff networks. And there was a request for us to continue to bring successes and opportunity to interact with our staff networks through the boards. Hence the reason why we invited colleagues today to share their staff stories. So it's an absolute pleasure, genuinely. We've moved, I think, from 3 networks to 8 really, really active, well-represented networks representing staff voice, as Daniel said, space for colleagues to kind of share their experiences and support actions to improve working experiences across the organisations. So we've got with us here today Sophie Babbager, who's our Wellbeing and Inclusion Lead, and also 3 of our network chairs. So we have Poppy, Lav and Corbin. They're going to take us through a presentation for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Just before I pass over to my colleagues from the LGBTQ plus staff network and the AHP forum, I just thought it'd be nice just to kind of give you an overview of the networks that we have here at the organisation and some of the key achievements that we've seen from these networks. So we have our Inspiring Women Staff Network, which was set up earlier this year, and since being set up and having a chair and vice chair in place, the staff network has successfully run a panel discussion for International Women's Day, and they've also run a series of wellbeing events as part of Women's Health Week. So that was support on menstrual health, menopause, mental health, and loads of other sort of support as well. So there was health checks as well available throughout the week of Women's Health Week. We also have our ethnic minority staff network. So some of the key achievements that this network has had since it's been running, so it has been live for a couple of years now, but they've been instrumental in supporting with the Anti-Racism Action Plan, and they've celebrated Black History Month with loads of events across October for Black History Month, and we've also celebrated Eid in collaboration with the catering team. So we had food across our sites as part of Eid celebration. We also have our neurodiversity staff network, which was set up at the start of this year, and they've done some great work as well. So they've held the Neurodiversity Summit which included loads of different sessions around understanding neurodiversity, support for line managers, and they also held a panel discussion with neurodiverse colleagues across our organisation. We've got our disability and long-term condition staff network, which is very recent. So we've only just appointed a chair and vice chair now in May 2025. And we also have the exec sponsor of Matt Connor for this network. So they've all met as a group and we look to set up the network meeting for the next couple of weeks. We also have our culture network. So the culture network has been around for a few years as well. So the key achievements have been around acting as a key driver for the discovery phase of the culture and leadership programme. And I also know that they've reached their target membership of 700 colleagues, which is fantastic. And then we've also recently introduced the Ethnic Minority Doctors Forum. So this is a new doctors forum off the back of the University HP Forum, which is fantastic. So the network has expanded to members of 73 members, and it's going strengthening across site, including Liverpool Women's. And then we've also just included that we've got our LGBTQ plus staff network and our ethnic minority nurses and AHP forum, but I'll let my colleagues take over for those slides. Move on.
So hello, my name's Poppy, my pronouns are she, her, and I am the chair of the LGBTQ plus staff network at Love.
I'm Laura, my pronouns are he and they. I'm the chair of the LGBTQ plus network at Liverpool Women's, as well as the Disability and Wellness Network. I'm also the EDI facilitator.
So we'll just quickly go through some previous events that we've ran and some upcoming and current plans that we've got. So in February, we celebrated LGBTQ plus History Month, and that was sort of the launch for the network at Love. So we got in touch with a number of different organisations in the local community and invited them into our hospital. So you can see a handful of those on the slide. And we have sort of maintained and managed a really good working relationship with a few of these organisations. So one of those includes LGBT Foundation, who were recently set up in Liverpool. And so they actually hosted tables at our sites, but also presented talks, including for HIV testing week as well, because that happened during February. And we also invited in AJ Jackson, who is a non-binary Paralympian, who delivered a really impactful and inspirational talk that explored intersectionality between sort of LGBTQ plus identities and sexualities and ADHD and other sort of physical disabilities as well.
So at Liverpool Women's Hospital, we did very similar, and the two networks collaborate quite closely. So on LGBTQ History Month and Pride Month as well, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So at Liverpool Women's Hospital, we ran a campaign called the Walk in My Shoes campaign, which was a series of webinars across 4 weeks, inviting guest speakers in from the local community to talk about their experiences being LGBTQ+ on different issues. So the first session was on LGBT history, next one was on sexuality and then gender identity, and then the last one was on intersectionality. So with that, we reached over 200 members of staff across regional sites as well. We've had some attendance from Merseyside Police, and that was sort of a big invite across the group as well. We also hosted some stalls for that as well. Recently, back in March, me and Poppy did a lunch and learn session for Transgender Day of Visibility, where we sort of talk about the reality of the non-binary, transgender and intersex people. I gave my sort of lived experience of being a trans member of staff and a patient as well, having used the women's services. And the attendance for that was really good. We have that recording. Again, that's been sent out to regional LASP as well as sort of regional EDI teams.
So we also invited in National Museums Liverpool, who again we have quite a good working relationship with. We're actually part of an LGBTQ+ stakeholder group as well for the region. So as Lav mentioned, we've had sort of attendance from the police, but we're in good connection with a lot of different organisations who are really strong in their support for the LGBT community. And as well as that, we also have strong connections with the other NHS trusts across the region, so across Cheshire and Merseyside. So there's about 12 trusts, I'd say, and we're in good talks with the network chairs for all of those trusts, and we are currently planning for Pride alongside them.
So a big thing that's been for a couple of years within the networks and sort of the wider NHS staff community of LGBTQ+ networks is that we wanted to march together. So I'm not sure if anyone's been to the LCR Pride March, but usually they split into blocks and each trust has traditionally been separately. But this year we've managed to get everyone to come together. So we're marching as a whole NHS trust regionally. still having trust branding and everything in our own blocks, but that way we can sort of have more of a community rather than working in silo. Along with that, we have some other events. So this week we had LGBT Foundation come in and give an introduction to their services. Next week we have another guest speaker coming in, someone that came from February, do a little history and sort of the importance of why pride is in practice today as well. On Sunday we have an event which Poppy has organised with an organisation called Merseyside Queer Walks. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so they're just a local community from Liverpool who organise walks for LGBT and queer people. So that is this Sunday at Sefton Park. And then like in LGBT History Month, we've actually reached out to about 80 organisations to come in and set up table stalls again across site so that there's a bit more visibility, not just for our staff members, but for patients as well in the main entrances and into the hospital. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kulida Kaur, and I'm chairperson for Ethnic Minority Nurses at HB Forum. And thank you for time today to give you a bit of overview about the forum. So the Ethnic Minority Forum was created to ensure that the staff from ethnic minority background have a structured and supported space to share their experience, where they can support each other with the career development and support value of inclusivity, and also encourage wider participation as well. And that will help us to make and influence decision making and also contribute to more inclusive organizational culture. At present, we got more than 500 registered member on all 3 sites. For the membership and leadership, so I'm the forum chair for the whole of the trust, and we got a deputy chair for all our sites, also secretary on each site and communication officer as well. To have a membership on the forum, plus any nurses or allied health professional who identify themselves that they belong to the ethnic minority background can just and they will be allowed to attend the meeting, participate in any activities or workshops arranged by the forum. These are some structured activities that we hosted last year. So last year we hosted a bi-monthly meeting, and those was attended by the subject expert matters such as Freedom Speak Guardian, education team that helped and supported us to signpost our staff if they're looking into career development or educational opportunities. We also arranged a workshop for track application that supported staff member how to apply for jobs and help and support them shortlisting. And that was well attended by 30 members. We could only offer to 30 maximum, but we received a very good feedback from everyone. The forum also supported with the international recruitment event as well. So far, we supported more than 50 members of staff with mentoring, pastoral support, and have career conversations with them as well. The forum report back to the staff network, and I also report back to the allied health professional and educational meeting to Deputy Director of Workforce, and then it gets reported to the Director of Nursing for any concerns or issues. But at the moment, the forum challenges is a staff attendance. As I said, we've got more than 500 members who are registered to the forum, but the attendance for the meetings remain between 40 to 50. And I really like to encourage and increase that attendance so all our staff can benefit and we have maximum impact of all those meetings, because they're only good if the staffs are attending and getting all that information we are providing them as well. For career progression and leadership roles, we still get feedback from staff members that they had a very successful interview, but none appointment. So I would really like to be encouraged that if we can have representation of ethnic minority staff on the interview panel, so we can have a transparent selection or appointment criteria for the job interviews and selections as well. For our officers availability, we could only offer the workshop to 30 staff because I have a limited officers available who can support with all the activities the network do. Because we haven't got any, as a chair, I haven't got any allocated time in my diary as well. So that's the love of labor. We wanted to do it and wanted to support our staff, and that's what we trying to put that in our diary. But I do know all our officers are clinicians working on busy jobs, and it really depends either they had a time available or not to support with all the activities we are arranging. So it really depends on their time and availability. So I really like to ask if we can have some allocated time for the officers so they can support with the all ongoing activities and bi-monthly meetings as well. All the workshops or activities arranged by the forum or any activities we are arranging, we haven't got any allocated funding. So that also comes from a love of labor that people wanted to do it and they contribute towards all those activities as well. So that's all from me today. Thank you so much. Yeah, so with your support, the Ethnic Minority Fund can help shape the organization where everyone, regardless of their background, can thrive, lead, and belong. And I really appreciate your help and support on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Do you want to say any more?
I just wanted to say, obviously, thank you for taking the time to come and share that with us. It's always brilliant, isn't it, to kind of put colour to all of the work that you do, and we can really, to your point, Rod, put ourselves in colleagues' shoes and really utilise your energy, passion, the investment that you put into this, and I guess a personal and a collective thank you for all the work that you do. And thank you for outlining some of the areas that potentially we may be able to help you to kind of help each of the networks to flourish even further into 25-26. And thank you. It's brilliant.
Any thoughts, reflections, please? David?
I just want to pass on a personal thanks to colleagues here. Thank you all several times. I think the work that you're doing is really, really important. And obviously there's people within our organisation who work here who will feel isolated, and that isolation will come for a whole different range of reasons, whether it's cultural or their personal backgrounds or whatever. And having an opportunity just to be with people who they feel safe with, to be able to be a little bit more open, it is really important, because we know that if people bring their best self to work, being the corporate hat on here, people bring their best self to work, they provide better care and are work better with colleagues. And we could do all the celebratory stuff, and that's really great. But I think what I would really benefit from is understanding perhaps more of those issues that we're not getting right, or that we just need to continue working with, because that's our role as well, to work with you and colleagues to understand how things can be better. But thank you.
Yeah.
Chair. Morning. I represent the neurodiverse network, and I think the challenges that you've put up at the end are, they're real. I've had a number of personal appointments with people, so I think the networks are doing a great job at raising the awareness for people across the organisation. But what we're finding is that the time commitment for people to come out of their jobs, and you're trying to balance the service delivery and also people saying we would like to spend a bit more time on whether that be raising awareness or also the support for staff as well. I've got a few more meetings in my diary over the next couple of weeks with more people that have reached out to me. But I think that's something we're going to have to work through. I don't think we have the answers yet as an organisation, but it's something that we're just going to have to resolve, because there's no point in having the network and then people can't get to the meetings and whatever. So yeah, I think it's work in progress, but I think you're doing a great job of raising that awareness. So well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Let's Sarah next.
Firstly, thank you for what you're personally contributing to this. Staff networks or inclusive communities are a really important part of any culture, and to your point, David, it's where that kind of psychological safety starts. An offer of support. So I'm the exec sponsor in Cisco for all our inclusive communities, and we've got a lot more resource and a lot more resources. And so if there's anything that we can do that takes some of that burden away, that shares some of the resources or starts to partner them, then have to put some support into that.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Jenny.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for coming and presenting today. I think a reflection from me over the last couple of years, it does feel more tangible, more apparent, more visible. You can really feel the sense of inclusion and visibility. I guess my question is it making a difference? Are things changing? What's the experience like for people? What feedback are you getting? Because I know that, as Beth says, there are difficult time constraints for people to get involved. I sponsor the Dawn Network at the Women's, and it is, it is hard for people to get the time and create the space to get involved. So are you measuring, or does it feel any different since we've really kind of taken this work forward?
Yeah, I would say sort of. So I'm vaguely new to a trust. I joined back in August. I was at Royal University Teaching Hospitals beforehand. And I'd say since sort of the network, especially LGBT networks, been collaborating as a transgender member of staff, I do feel more included. I feel more safe. It's nice to see sort of representation, and I've had people approach me who are also trans, who are also LGBTQ, who have sort of said, because I see you being visible and because the network is visible, people feel more safe and more like they belong with the trust as a group as a whole.
Yeah, I think again our network only sort of started in November last year at Love, so it is relatively new. I think it is that thing where people don't have the time to come away, which is a really big barrier to you'll be able to benefit and access from the network. So attendance is probably not as high as we would like it to be. Some network meetings, well, most network meetings I've held only have about 4 or 5 people, which we have about 80 on the mailing list. So it's obviously a very small percentage of the actual members of the network, but I know that we are reaching those people, and it tends to be different faces each time. So we are reaching different people, and I think if they have availability, they do attend. And I've had people say to me, even if it feels like there's no one there, we do get your emails, even though we don't reply to it, like we are receiving that information. So I think help with communicating about the networks would be really beneficial, you know, having the support from the likes of yourselves to sort of forward on emails and things with communications about what we're doing. And because again, I think in terms of making a real impact in the trust, especially for our network at the moment, where we're currently developing transgender policies, but following the Supreme Court ruling, obviously we've ended up putting a hold on it because we don't know what the guidance is from NHS England yet. But of course, it's a very scary time for a lot of obviously trans people, non-binary people, even a lot of women as well, who might not be sort of the conventional, you know, femininity. So I think any support sort of with that process as well will be greatly appreciated. We are in touch with the other trusts, as we have said, and so we are sort of sharing notes about policies and things like that, but that's probably a big area for development for us, because I think that'll give people a lot of security if we get policy right.
I think what I just want to add on from my side, I was having the same issue with the attendance, so I thought I'll move away from traditional way of meetings. That's why I ended up arranging that workshop, where 2 months before the off-duty turn, I've sent the invite for the workshop, and I offered 30 places, and that was all booked, and I had a waiting list for that, and everybody make the most out of it. But then I need to be mindful, if I'm running a workshop, I need experts who can give advice people on interview skills, presentation skills, then get in touch with people if they got a time in their diary, they can something support or not. So it's even running a workshop, then again, you need more commitment from other people, you know, who are either officer. And I did have a support from people who are not even a member or not even an officer, you know, from my other colleagues. So it does run from like support from everyone kind of things, whichever way you go, either it's a meeting or a workshop. It's just the time in everyone's diary.
Thank you. So, thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting. And I think you put your finger on it. You have to see it to be it, don't you? In terms of that, I just wondered, you answered my question I would have asked about the Supreme Court judgment. That's for you, really. In terms of how do we utilise this in recruitment of staff? Because actually, often the most talented staff come from the different minorities. Do we promote the networks in the recruitment literature to say, if you're from one of these organised, you know, one of these backgrounds, there will be a welcome home for you when you arrive in this organisation?
I think in answer to your question, Jeffrey, I think specifically around recruitment element, there's more that we can do on it. But certainly from an induction perspective, we talk about all of the networks that we've got and accessibility and support. So yeah, no, there's it's probably a plan of work where we've got a number of things that we need to do. But certainly when the organisation, we support you to land well and understand what kind of the experience looks like. But yeah, from an attraction perspective, there's some more work that we could absolutely do.
Because if people got choices where they work, and if we can actually use some of the stories in the literature, then people think, actually, yeah, I would fit in there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. James. Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I was reflecting on 3 years ago when I started, I met with the network leads. I think there was only 2. And they all said the same thing. We haven't managed to meet in a long, long time. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And it just felt like a huge challenge to even get this off the ground. The progress you've made in the last year or so has been fantastic. So thank you. Particularly Sophie, thank you as well, because I know you've put a lot of work into this over the last year, and it is massively better than it was, but we've still got lots to do. So those issues that you described around the challenges, I'd like us to take those away and perhaps bring that back
to the board and let them know what we've done about that on the next meet, because there's still some things we need to do. Thank you very much, everybody. That was fantastic to hear.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoyed those comments. So you're doing fantastic work, and as James says, we'll, as a board, will look at how we support all of this. But in addition to all the things that everybody else has said in support and thanks for the work you do, thank you for bringing such positive energy to the start of our board meeting. Work through the better as a result of the energy you've given us at the start of the meeting. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Fantastic.
It's really good.
Okay, we've got the minutes of our meeting on the 8th of May, which was at Royal. Very extensive in that meeting. We covered a lot of ground. It's reflected in the note. Any points of accuracy or fact in its report? I ask you to approve them. Consent to approve. Thank you very much. We have a few items on the action. Daniel, can you just
Yeah, there are-
through those?
Yeah, there are 5 actions, 3 of which complete. The complete ones are APA, where there was an update on no criteria to reside. That was discussed at the last meeting. At today's meeting, we'll also discuss it as we talk through the hospital management group board reports. AP 13. So details, we also discussed the sepsis metrics, and within the chief executive's report today, there's details about how that metric's changed and how it fits in with the ACRA metric. AP 14, the update on cancer performance within Liverpool Women's is covered within Jenny's hospital management report in Appendix B. So they're the ones that are tasked as complete. Those that remain open both relate to workshop sessions that we need to organise, one on organ donation and one on operational standards, both of which we're planning for and will be arranging over the next 3 to 4 months.
Okay, thank you. So, for clarity, if organ donation and transplantation going to come as a patient story, or we're going to engage with that in a different way?
We're going to engage in it in a slightly different way. We're trying to work on that with Jim, and we're trying to make the final one.
Okay, everyone content? Yes. Status of the action. Thank you. Go straight to the Chief Executive Officer.
Chair, I'm not going to go through the whole report today. There's a few things just to draw out. I firstly just want to recognise the response of the organisation and partner organisations around the major incident following the events that happened at the Liverpool Victory Parade. So again, the teams did a fantastic job, and it demonstrated that the EPRR response was really first class. So we've been congratulated by the NHS side of things, but also partner organisations like Police, Fire, as well. As always, there's learning that comes out of those things. So every test of our EPRR plan comes up with other things that we can learn from, and there was post-incident meetings held where learning was taken. We adapt our plans going forward. So again, it was a useful, if that's the right phrase, in that sense. But seems to do a great job of managing the incident. I wanted to reference to well led. That's now been publicised. So CPC well led. Rating of good, which was previously inadequate, was publicised last week. It was great to see that from a staff perspective. They've put 3 years of hard work into that, and they've got a result, which is great. And also for Broad Green as well, who managed to continue that good rating, which, given the pressure on that site now, additional beds everywhere in terms of the pressures on ED and so on, is fantastic. And there were several areas that were better than good and deemed outstanding as well, which is great. I wasn't going to go through the rest of the report in any particular detail. The sepsis explanation is in there because we've talked about that sepsis metric coming into the board report in the future, so that we've just explained what it's going to look like. But we're still compiling that data from AQ, or they're compiling it on our behalf. But I did want to reference just some a further update, which is I was in a meeting on I don't know what day it was, Tuesday, I think it was. Yes, Tuesday morning, over in Bolton with the NHS Chief Executive and regional team, just hearing more about what's happening over the next few months and weeks. The spending review is in full flow at the minute, and the early signs of that are that there's not going to be any more money, particularly from an NHS perspective. We've reached the ceiling of NHS funding is the phrase that was used. What we've got is currently unaffordable, but there is a recognition from the government at least that there is enough money in the NHS. It's about how it's utilised. So we're not going to see that change significantly, I don't think. The financial position for the North West is a huge challenge. So the North West has basically posted a deficit plan of about 500 million, circa 500 million, and at month one is 100 million deficit. So you can see the trajectory that that's on already. So that is causing significant concern nationally. Cheshire Merseyside within that is one of the bigger numbers within that with the most risk in its plan. So you can see why we get so much scrutiny on that. The NHS CEO was really positive about the 10-year plan. They're on version 7. And like everything, it's linked to the spending review. So every time the spending review moves on slightly, the plan gets watered down slightly based on affordability. But his sort of mood on that, I think, was quite positive, in particular around community and neighbourhood care and the fact that stuff that hadn't really been spoken about for a long time was making its way back into planning, which sounded very positive. But we were also clearly told that the expectation will be delivery of the key targets that, let's just say, politicians have a key focus on, so that the money primarily, but also the delivery of the elected long waiting lists, and in particular, this being the new government's first winter, because even though they were in power, the last government were really with the preparatory government for last winter, if you like. So there'll be a lot of focus on how well winter is managed. The reasons to be cheerful, there weren't many, but within that, I think, is that there's definitely a shift in this new NHS leadership team to get away from short-term planning. So what Jim was saying was that they are now going to launch a 3-year plus 2-year plan process, and they want to launch it in the summer rather than Christmas Eve. So what they're going to do is in summer, we'll all be required to do 3 plus 2-year plans, collect individually, but will be looked at collectively, obviously, within the city of Liverpool or Cheshire Mersey. I think this is really positive because if you start to get out of a cycle of that, you get the plan, you get Christmas Eve, you don't get the refreshed guidance, the plans are going in by March, but by the time they're agreed it's summer and you don't know where you are. So he was very positive about that. So I think they're going to use obviously the political recess in the summer as a time to get all the planning sorted. So if that comes off, I think that'll be a real positive shift for all of us, really. As we know, as part of our work for the UHL group, our last work, we've been asked to do a 3-year plan based on our case for change. So obviously that will now need to line up with whatever the planning guidance looks like, or the guidance is for these 3-year plans. Otherwise, we'll end up doing it twice. So the regional finance director has communicated with Rob and I that he'll sort of give us some clarity about how that should look, so that the work we do on the case for change lines up neatly with this ask in the summer. And it's clear that that ask is for each of the individual performance organisations, but the look for last for Liverpool will be, what does that look like as 5 as well? So we'll still link in that sense. So yeah, I think reasons to be cheerful are better planning, hopefully a 10-year plan that's got some context around neighbourhood delivery and supporting all of that. The grim bit of it was the financial position, which I think we all knew, and the reasons why we are in this sort of turnaround position in Cheshire and Mersey at the moment. That was all I was going to say, Chair. There are obviously there's lots in there around the performance at the moment, and there's some really good stuff going on in there, but I'm sort of at risk of repeating the individual hospital reports that I'll walk through as well.
Thank you. We make reference in the report to the Never event. Are we picking this up in the reportable issues later in the day?
Yeah, we can do it in reportable issues if you'd like, or it can be picked up under the individual site. Sure, that's yeah, okay. It was the intravenous medication, wasn't it?
Oral, yeah.
Well, oral medication given intravenously. Yeah. So, do you want to pick that up on the?
We've all picked it up now.
Well, I mean, it's in the report basically, as it says, that a never event where an oral medication was given intravenously, that harm to the patients was negligible. It's been reviewed properly. It's gone through the whole process. So it follows any sort of typical never event process. We flagged it just because it was medications related.
And just to give assurance that the individual members of staff are being supported in their learning and to understand best about how they manage the process. We're not making any judgments at this point. Art of the investigation, and just clarifying it was administered subcutaneously rather than
Essentially,
and the patient. And obviously, the fear was there would be some tissue damage because of the research, and there wasn't any direct harm because of that incident.
Okay, thank you. It's clear. On the, we'll come on to a more discussion of some of the operational issues we get side by side. But again, we talk about this whole group or the whole look rather for our A&E performance. Set out that we're 79 on that list.
Yeah.
That includes all types, doesn't it? So presumably you sort of place, when we compare to others, it's about the balance of how much of the activity is type 1 versus how much is other. So in that sense, it's a bit hard to get the comparison. Is there a similar ranking just for type 1 performance across the place?
there is.
Yeah.
But that isn't what's used nationally, though, is it?
No, they are using the all types.
But that can give us a sense of type 1.
Yeah, so we're about 100.
So it's really tough on them.
Yeah, so we're sort of bottom quartile on individual 4-hour performance, but on the all type stuff, which is the national metric.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or yes, Mike?
Can I just on the IPR, which I think is more the science specific, it's the sickness absence performance that just seems to, the last couple of years, doesn't seem to have shifted significantly. I don't know whether that's around particular hotspots that are being difficult to resolve or whether it's across the piece, but we seem to be stuck somewhere between 6 and 7% fairly routine. And we're trying to get down below that. So just comment on.
Yeah, I mean, the individual site reports did show significant challenges at Broad Green during the last few months, which I think Nat had reported on previously. So there are differences between the sites. From a benchmark perspective, it's actually not bad compared to other organisations. It's even or slightly better actually, and it's a lot less erratic than it was. So there's much more stability in it over the last 2 years than there was previously. But you're right, it's still an issue for us.
Yes, ma'am.
That was a Broad Green. If you look in the IPR, it's improved in the last 2 months around sickness absence. But a 1% improvement in sickness absence would significantly improve our financial position. So we're going to pick up a Lough-wide piece of work around improving and focusing on the sickness absence. Some of it we feel is directly linked to the lack of HR business partnering support. We've had to support our teams with the sickness absence reviews and the referrals they need to Oc Health, etc. And we've recruited now to those posts. So we're going to take a real focus now on sickness absence by department and what's driving it, what we need to do. It's intrinsically linked to what we need to do around run rate expenditure.
Can we quantify how much
we have
financial benefit we get on a 1% improvement?
Yes.
Millions.
If we did it across all sites, yeah.
1% improvement is something like 160 people being. So it's quite significant.
If we assume they're all backfilled.
Yeah, which they are. So but it will still be fairly significant. The leavers within 1 year metric was showing a sort of statistical improvement, which again, on the one hand, you think gives you cause for celebration because that's been a challenge for us in previous years. But I think we need to be realistic about the fact that with vacancy freezes everywhere and everything else, not many people will be moving.
Yeah.
So that's probably adding to that.
Yeah. Peter.
Yeah, just a couple of points. So just backing up the track a bit on the A&E for our performance. The entry, of course, is just type 1. So the performance you see in the entry IPR is type 1. I was going to pick it up in my report, but we have a strategy to reduce normal cause variation not moving. The way to move that quickly is the non-admitted 4-hour performance in that type 1. And that's all this work we're doing around our Sudoku. So we have a plan on that to push. We're now getting half the ED take through the Sudoku now, which is really good, but if we could push some more through there and the performance is much better, we know that if you go into Sudoku, your performance is 10-20% better. So that's the key issue, trying to prove that at the end.
Okay.
On the sickness absence, Again, we're looking at currently in Aintree, we're running about 6.1%, again, normal cause variation, but it's not just short-term sickness, it's long-term sickness, which in some ways gives us a potential to improve it. Some of it's in that sense, well-being and that type of stuff, and our pay bill being, £500,000 over this month, a portion of that is spent on sickness absence. So there is some financial gain to get that right, isn't it?
Thank you. Any more comments? Yes, Jeffrey.
From your role at the NHS, what's the absence there? When I was there, it was 3%. What is it now?
But it's not 3%, I'll tell you that much, because they've been concerned about it at the previous 3 or 4 board meetings. It had moved out. My recollection was it was somewhere around 6 or 7. Yeah. So, but I will find that out. I wasn't expecting to be asked that just questions. Sorry, no, that's all right. I'll make sure I rehearse the up ones ahead of the But yeah, you're right. It was picked up when David and I arrived at our. We've got how many board meetings? We have now 1 or 2. The previous one we observed, the people committee were concerned about the sickness absence rate because it had been up at 6% for a while.
The point you've landed, Jeffrey, is that it's deteriorated since you left the board.
Yes.
That's it, because it's about across Cheshire and Merseyside is how do we land across and we measure the same things. And what does that tell us more widely about, culture and morale, as well as, if we're an outlier, then you worry about what we're doing.
Yeah,
absolutely. Pick up the point about the business partners. That was a concern of mine a few months ago, and we're down to 1, I think, at the Royal, which is just unsustainable. Managers need that support if you're going to manage absence effectively.
Yeah, but if we were going to benchmark sickness absence against the rest of the country, then for Liverpool we should give it as last. Because in a specialist trust with no ED, no major trauma, it's going to be better. If you bring all of us together and look at an aggregated rate, that would be interesting.
Okay, thank you. David.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question for now, Chair, or when we get to the individual reports, but we see that the number of patients with no criteria to reside is making a pleasing improvement. Yeah. Just wonder when or if we'll see that feeding through into the A&E performance times.
Can we pick it up on the site report?
Yes, we can.
If that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Talking about group-wide.
Yeah, so the usual report comes through to the board. So we've still got 3 significant risks noted in Appendix 1. That's for corporate services. So the financial risk that we all know and love around the failure to develop a suitable plan for 25-26, the financial balance, 1, and the corporate nursing safeguarding risk, which has been at 12 since February, and the updates on what's happening with those. We did say at the last meeting that we would give the board a view of the new operational standards that are being asked for in this year's planning and where we currently sit on those. So we've added the proposed operational risk for 25-26 to this as well, because these sit across the organisation. So as the 5% target for diagnostics, which you can see on there, the elective recovery risks, of which there are 3, because there are now different standards to be achieved by March 26 on elective recovery. The ED type 1 performance of 59%, and for the planning target, I want to just clarify the planning target 78% is for all types. My assumption is that, whereas our 59% is the type 1 performance there. So you've just seen in the report that we've said, I think we're about 70-odd%, but we need to be at 78. And then the cancer waiting times 28-day FDS standard, which we are just short of at the moment, but performing better on than previously at the limits and improving again at both. So we've given scores to all of those and kept them in full sight of this report. Given that we report as individual hospitals, everybody is reporting on the detail of what they're doing about those, but it felt sensible for this year to have just those key operational risks here at aggregate level, so we can keep track of where we are scoring. And Ned had asked previously about the recovery of things like ED and so on. So this would be a suitable way to manage that, we've proposed. So if the board are happy with the proposal to include those operational risks through this report for this year, as well as the standard corporate service risks. That's the decision we need to make. And then happy to take any questions on the risks themselves. Mike.
Yeah, very supportive. Just to say, really encouraged to see site level trajectories have been developed for different aspects of it. So that was really, really helpful.
Thank you.
Just to pick on the nursing safeguarding risk, we discussed that before. The government announced last month a new ED for mental health. I've not seen anything fleshed out what that means in reality, because that if it works well, would have potential to impact on those patients. But what does that mean for Merseyside? Where would it be?
Repeating that.
Yep. So the safeguarding risk around mental health patients, and the government announced the ED provision for those with mental health going there rather than a traditional A&E. Where in Merseyside is that proposed to be, and will that have an impact on this risk?
So that's, so the part of the work with the ICB at the minute, working with Mersey Care, is looking at the models of how do they convey and deflect to somewhere else. At the minute, in Merseyside, we do not have the safe place ED that's dedicated to mental health, but that's one of the things Mersey Care are scoping at the minute. So potentially that would deflect your ED attendances and support that. The main benefit of that would be that we potentially wouldn't get the long waiters in the ED assessment areas waiting then for transfer. What it wouldn't do is necessarily support the inpatient risk where we've got long waits on the inpatient wards, but it would definitely help from an entry in a Royal ED perspective. And we were in a meeting last week with the ICB and Mersey Care where we're working through those plans, what that might look like. So,
So on that particular risk, we've spoken quite a lot about that mental health risk, both in the ED and also the wards. And I suppose the question I've got is, whilst I can see that a set of KPIs has been developed in work with Mersey Care, how will board members know what difference that is actually making so that they can see the changes?
Okay, so I was about to just comment on how we'll manage these risks going forward. So in my chief executive report before, I outlined the fact that we're going to be moving to the Insurance Risk Committee imminently. And that's because the Insurance Risk Committee, we used to have that a while ago. The board, as the organisation is getting bigger, it's more complex, feels like the board meetings are getting overly full of some of the operational detail and risks, and that's fine. The Insurance Risk Committee will still be undertaken in a sort of public view, so it's not a separate committee that's going to be somewhere else outside of the board. But that Insurance Risk Committee, in the way that we used to use it, was for each of the hospitals to go through the reporting that they do here. But we're also proposing that we use it to go through these corporate risks and operational risks at the trust level. So by taking this report in future through the Insurance Risk Committee, we'll be able to put some metrics alongside each of these corporate risks so we can all see the trajectories for improvement of things like ED across the board, the elective stuff across the board, as well as hear from the hospitals, their individual component parts of that. I think that will strengthen both, well, not strengthen, but give us more time in the board meeting to be on the front foot around some of the more strategic and medium to long-term issues, which get a bit crowded out sometimes with the number of challenges that we're managing. But it'll also give us the opportunity to have more in-depth discussions on those key operational risks around the money, around the ED, and around the elective waiting times, because it's sometimes hard, particularly for NHS, to put together the jigsaw of the various pieces of the organisations. So if we follow this sort of, these are our key corporate risks for the year, that's what we're intending to do that. So to answer Daniel's question, that's exactly where that corporate risk on mental health would have a deep dive, but that Assurance Risk Committee. And then the board will focus clearly on the strategic.
Sorry, just to follow on from James' point, we've developed a set of performance metrics for that risk. So we've got a baseline and we're going to review that in July. And then we can identify which of those mitigations have actually made some impact and what we further need to do. Either us or a system.
Thank you, Dave.
I think the way you're describing it, and particularly those meetings with Mersey Care, are so important because actually some of their metrics are actually key to us, because the trouble with mental health patients is that if you're going to section them, you have to know which bed they're going to, because you can't just section them. So they wait because they're trying to locate a bed somewhere and they have to know specifically where in the country or which ward it's going to be. So And that's a granularity of detail that we'd have to do at operational level. You'd have to get that down with Merseycare, wouldn't you? All we can do is within our boundaries, keeping those patients safe. But I think that's going to be the crux of the matter. It usually is around, the availability of mental health beds, really.
James, thank you.
I'll add here because I think it's helpful. Jim Mackey's response to a question the other day about social care and the challenges of local authorities and the people stuck in beds was, a significant proportion of delays are still within the NHS family. And what he wants to do now is to move away from measuring trust metrics like criteria to reside as the key indicator and instead move to measuring community and mental health trust metrics. And over the last 10 years, that has almost evaporated. There are virtually no metrics for community trusts and few for mental health trusts that relate to the sort of patient stuck in the system. So it's clear they're going to turn the attention now to significant targets being placed on community provision or getting people home rather than hospitals having people stuck. So I think, again, that signals a shift in the way that this is going to be managed, which will be helpful.
Yeah, it must have been said, but it's just Trixie's point, absolutely the right one there actually, is that normally the metrics on getting assessed are good now with our work with Merseycare. It's then the person needs to be placed is then the problem because actually the no criteria to reside from the mental health is probably worse proportion than is health. So therefore, the bed availability is the problem, and we're working really clearly on the escalation processes pretty well in the ED. With the wards that tighten up on, and then back to Jeffrey's point around the sort of mental health EDs or whatever. That's sort of the model that Merseycare are thinking about when someone is assessed as possibly needing a bed to move to a facility where they could be further assessed and actually you reduce the need for admission if you look at that model, and that's the particular model where we're liaising. I think there's a way of preventing admission, like we're doing with physical health. So it's all sort of we do the same thing we do with physical health, really mental health.
So with this longer list now of the corporate libraries, because of the new operational standards that are set nationally this year. So just to reinforce the point that James made, we're going to re-establish, a number of you people are happy with this, support it. We're going to re-establish the Assurance Risk Committee. Everybody on the board's a member of that committee. And there we can delve more into, as you say, James, the trajectories for improvement that this paper says that David's highlighted that we're working on. So we can see when we expect to improve against standard and reach standard. And we can understand a bit what the impact that the actions that we're taking to improve performance from where we are now, where we need to get to. We can see the impact that we can consider if further actions are required. And just to reinforce the point that our re-establishing isn't taking away the transparency and accountability of this. So the meetings will be, the agendas will be public agendas, and all the meetings will be recorded for people to access. And of course, in line with our model of good governance, there will still be issues that escalate out of the arm that require to come into the board to be considered as part of the bigger strategic picture that we'll focus on here. So I think the time's right for this change, and I think it will make us better the way that we address some of the improvement that's required. So everybody can take it. Thank you very much. Right. We're going to the site reports, and it's in these reports. Sorry, I should have said we pick up the finance issues in the group finance update report. We will pick up some of the issues out of the IPR in the site specific. People to not to by the IPR, and we start on the site specific report.
So HMB report is included. I won't go back through the major incidents things already referenced it. I would just like to recognise that the Royal Site Director of Nursing, Lindsay Lasman, was the exec responsible for managing the major incident across sites, and She was absolutely superb. So I think the leadership as well through the major incident was brilliant. So just to recognise that from the Royal perspective. Just moving through, we've just touched on sepsis. So you remember at the Royal, we had a query because in the IPI it was showing around 40% compliance with the 3-hour sepsis ACRA data. Clinical Effectiveness Committee have done a deep dive on that, and the performance is actually for September was 84.6% now that we've gone through the data and it's been fully validated. So much improved from what the original IPR was showing. And as James referenced, we're expecting the release of the AQ data in May. So we'll expect that to be reflected in those reports. So that correlates with what we felt from the CQC and our own internal audits that we actually have really strong sepsis performance in ED. The main thing I wanted to highlight was the decision made at the HMB around the acute medical unit and the same day emergency care unit. When the Royal moved into the new building, we doubled the size when they moved of the acute medical unit and created a same day emergency care unit as they didn't have one in the old Royal. This was an unfunded model, and through the cost pressure exercise a couple of years ago, we got the budget allocated to us for that unit. We've been working with the teams for quite a long time to make sure that we can agree the medical and nursing model for those units that provided the best value for money. We've finally come to an agreement on that and have an approved business case, which we approved through HMB, and it's within the recurrent budget that we have, and we're expecting that to decrease our run rate by about £1 million annually now. ANU is the area where at the Royal we spend the highest amount on banking agency, and I'm now working with the teams on a trajectory for that reduction, and I'm expecting that to start taking impact from September. Just to point out, in that case, when I come to the risk, we have reinvested.
Sorry, Chair, could I just ask people to speak up?
Sorry,
I'll speak up because we're behind you.
Sorry, okay, I'll try and be louder. It's not usually a problem now. So we've also, as part of that, disinvested slightly in some of the medical staffing model and increased the pharmacy cover, and that links to the risk that I'll come on to on the risk register, which is 844 around the level of prescribing errors we've seen on the AMU. So we're hoping that's going to have a positive impact with increased senior pharmacy cover. They were the main things from the HMB. So if I just move on to performance. So if I start with UEC, in the IPR is the April metrics, and you'll see on not meeting criteria to reside, we've seen some real positive improvements, particularly through the month of May. So as we referenced on the site level trajectories, when you look at the UEC trajectories, we're above trajectory on all metrics. So the type 1 in May, we've actually gone up from 55 to 57% performance, and I think that's directly correlating now with the new weekly performance meeting that the Director of Ops is holding with all teams. Our 12 hours has reduced from 17.9% to 16.4%, which is ahead of the nationally agreed trajectory. And I think that is the metric that is directly linked to the not meeting criteria to divide. The 12-hour wait, we're seeing some significant improvement in that because of the flow through the hospital. And ambulance handover times are maintaining at an average of 34 minutes, which again is above the trajectory we agreed as part of the national planning. And you'll see in the IPR, we reduced over 60-minute handovers to 179 in months. So generally, we are seeing improved UEC metrics at the Royal. The plan for us is to de-escalate the ED corridor throughout this month. We have it down to 10 spaces currently, and we're aiming next week for that to be cleared. That is the first stage of our de-escalation plan, and then in July we'd be looking at starting to close some zones on one of our medical wards if we continue to see the improvement in the not meeting criteria to reside. From an NMC2R perspective, P3s have continued to reduce to the lowest we have ever had them. I have less than 30 patients now waiting for a P3 in the Royal, and over 60-day length of stay again is the lowest we've had it, with only 25 patients at the Royal that have been there 60 days.
Just explain P3.
Sorry, P3 obviously. P3 is patients that are waiting for a long-term placement in a nursing or residential care facility. So we now have an increased number of P1s, which is the patients who are able to go back to their own home with some support. So the two key things I wanted to raise on that is we were at an average of 8 days for those patients to get home. For the last 3 weeks, that's now come down to 6 days. That's still far above the 24 hours, but we're starting to see improvements now in that time to discharge. And we've talked previously around, we really feel like the coordination from admission to discharge via the transfer of care hub is what will really improve the P1 pathway. And through the work with the ICB and with Merseycare and the council, we have now agreed that we will establish transfer of care hubs both on the Royal and the Aintree sites, and we're aiming to do that from July. So that's a really positive step forward. So Pete and I have been working with the teams on site. We're starting a weekly project meeting this week, and we'll be able to update next month, but the aim will be to go live with that integrated hubs from July. From an elective performance perspective, again, really positive. So from a royal perspective, we're again above all trajectories that we submitted in our national planning. So we're at just under 60%, 18 weeks achievement against the 58% we needed to be at this month. Over 52 weeks, obviously for year end, we need to get to a target of 1%. We're currently at 1.09, but we're expected to be at 1.3, so we're ahead of trajectory. And our time to first appointment, we were in line with trajectory at 60%. So generally really strong on the elective performance. We haven't had any 65-week breaches in May. The only area I would flag that is concerning me at the Royal and Broad Green on elective is the dermatology and the increase in waiting list size for dermatology. We are very reliant on premium cost activity in dermatology because of the workforce, nationally, the workforce availability. We had reduced the level of additional activity we were doing because of the financial controls. So we're just reviewing that over the coming weeks just to make sure that we can keep managing the demand and capacity in dermatology and are going to be at risk of long waiters. So we will be picking that up through the Finance and Performance Committee. Then just on the risk registers, 2 new risks in month that are 12 plus. So we've got 8977. This is an ophthalmology scanner, which is no longer fit for purpose. This will be funded through as a priority to our medical equipment capital budget. So I expect that will be resolved in month and that risk will de-escalate. And then we have seen a new risk raised from the diabetes team around gestational diabetes support to pregnant ladies at Liverpool Women's. We have an SLA in place, but I think there's been an increased demand needed. So we've got a meeting with the Women's Hospital Leadership Team next week. So we'll review that and pick up any actions needed to support extra capacity for those patients. We've had 2 risks decreased in scoring months, so 7850. This relates to the streaming from the ED. So correlating to the improved performance, we've got the primary care streaming in place to the walk-in centre, which we're seeing about 15% of our ED attendance is now streamed over to the Linden Partner Centre. And we're seeing improved streaming to our frailty and STEP models. So we've decreased that score at the minute based on adjusted performance. And 6715, we've decreased the DMO1, which is the 6-week standard for diagnostics. Again, we're in line with trajectory. We're nearly back at the 5% around the gastroenterology improvement plan. So we've decreased that score. Just on the final risk, I won't go through mental health and the UEC ones. I think we've talked about those. There was the diabetic pump issue around community diabetes service at 8776. That is still there because we're undertaking the review of what the issues are that are driving that, what the possible solutions are. So that will come back to HMV next month. 7096 is the long-standing risk on demand and capacity in our urology service. We now have a business case with a number of options in, and I am going to be taking that to execs in 2 weeks' time to discuss how we try and get a more sustainable plan for urology. So I'm expecting by the time we come back to the board next month, we'll be able to hopefully outline what controls are now in place for that. And the final one, 8607, is the general surgery on call. This is the unsustainability of the EGS service at the Royal. I had a really productive meeting last night with all the clinical leads from general surgery, and we've agreed a way forward of revising that on call. And again, we'll be drawing some, bringing that through execs in future weeks for approval. And then just finally on finances. So you'll see there are 2 new risks at a 12 for divisional CIP achievement and divisional management of expenditure budgets. So we closed last year's financial risks, and these are the new risks relating to this financial year. We finished month 1 with an adverse variance of 0.26 million, but that did include the site revaluation of 1.3 million. So the true underlying position mainly for Royal and Broad Green was a 1.5 million deficit against plan. Just to simplify that, really, 1 million of that is made up of the CIP shortfall. So we've got about £1 million problem in month related to unachieved CIP. The other £500,000, there's 2 key issues. One is the primary care stream in the Linden Apartment Centre. We're currently funding the GP service there. It was part of winter pressures, but the impact has been significant, so we haven't removed it, we've continued it. But through the work with the ICB, we've now got agreement that from June that will be external funded. So Rob is just linking with the teams to get that transacted. So that pressure should go from June onwards. And the other element is pressure on pay, in particular WLIs at the Royal, because in the financial plans we agreed no premium spent for WLIs, but we are having to continue using them at the minute in gastroenterology and particularly urology to maintain the high levels of activity. So that is causing us a pressure of about 400,000 per month. Just on CIP as a whole, we've got a 34 million pound target. We've transacted 10.7 million recurrently. I've got another 3.5 million in green, which I'm expecting to transact. So I think we're on target at the minute for about 14 to 15 million transacted currently. I've still got about 40 million in red. That is the key focus at the minute. We're doing twice a week meetings with the divisions to work through that and the routes to cash and how we increase the pace on those schemes. And the final bit, from a whole-time equivalent perspective, when you compare the 12 to month one, we saw a 53 whole-time equivalent reduction at the Royal. 13 whole-time equivalents were at Broad Green, which was closure of some of the escalation beds that we've had open, and the other 21 whole-time equivalents were in medicine, largely around healthcare assistance and also the work we're doing around the escalation of the ED. That's the Royal.
Thank you. It's very good, very positive report. David, you raised the point earlier about no criteria to reside, and you want to pick up on that specifically.
I think Nat did, in that you link that to the improvements in ED, but if you could say any more.
Yeah, so I think on the NMC2R, I think the 12 hours will be the key metric to link to that. And we're seeing that reducing. So I think that's going to be the key one where we need to expect to see a reduction as the NMC2R comes down. But the biggest thing's going to be getting, once we get the pathway 1 patients down, they're still at 6 days. We need to get those down to 2 really to see that big impact, because there's nearly 200 patients at the minute across the Royal and Aintree on P1. So that's the bit I think we need to really focus on. Once we've got the transfer of care hub in July, we should expect significant improvement.
And at what point will that take the pressure off your pay budgets as well? Because presumably you can de-escalate some of that.
Yeah, so I'll let Pete pick up for Aintree because we've got individual site profile plans. So for the Royal, June is the ED corridor, which is about 700,000 a year. We'd expect reduction. From July, we would start closing the zones of award. So at the Royal, I've got about 3 million for award closure, and also award at Broad Green, another 2.3 million. So at the Royal, there's about 6 million tied into the profile plan around the not meeting criteria to reside, and then Pete has similar award closure plans.
So getting those P1s down to 2 days would be a huge improvement.
Well, yeah, and that's the drag. We need to see that happen, or we won't release the awards as planned. But we are, at the minute, we are on track with the trajectory for it.
Thank you.
Other points on?
There's a question about 4-hour A&E targets, and same across both sides. That individual site targets have been set for 25, 26.
Yeah.
I didn't understand who had set those targets and what they were based on.
So what we've done is, so we've got nationally we're monitored as look, not on the site. So we've got the target, haven't we, to get to the 78% for the year end. But what the corporate ops team have helped us with is that we've modelled where both sites are at the minute and put a stretch in for both sites. So the Royal had a higher baseline, so we've still got a 6% improvement, and so have Aintree. So we've done it site-based, but that when you bring it together, it will meet the look, what we need to do for look.
So like internally set.
Yes. And that's where I'm referring to when you look at our internal ones, we've met or exceeded them.
Jeffrey next.
Really good report, and so many positives to report on, so my congratulations to you. It's a question really perhaps going forward to the new Assurance and Risk Committee on the absence. Look at Broad Green, it seems higher, and it's quite spiky over the last 3 years. Could we have a breakdown when we get to an ARC meeting on long-term and short-term, so we can see what the pressures are?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Now, with Jenny and Peter's agreement, I think we just changed the order here because I think there's more read across from the Royal into the Aintree report. So can we take Aintree next?
Of course we can, thank you. So the report's there. Currently there is 11 risks sitting at 12 or more on the Aintree high risk register. There is one at 13, which is the discharge risk 6425, which I'll come back to when I cover A&E and answer some of the questions that David and Tom have posed. There's 3 new risks on this risk register this month, some of which we have seen before. The first new one is 6940, which is the emergency theatre demand. There's been a bit of a spike in that, particularly in general surgery. We're managing that internally by flexing the list, but we're looking for a longer term solution around moving some of the emergency work into a semi-emergency planning way of managing it. So that will hopefully then that risk under control. There's also a risk 8543, which is around surgical subspecialty in reach. There was a couple of concerns raised in month, but there's been a really helpful meeting cross-site between that team and my team, and there's a really clear plan now about how surgical specialty in reach is managed across the sites. So we're getting assurance on that, and that risk will then come back down this month. There's a third new risk, 8478, which is around administrative posts in orthopaedics. We've done an admin review in orthopaedics and have now agreed which posts we can recruit to, and there's a 80,000 CIP as well attached to that. So that risk will also come back down in a month, and so that will disappear. Just going through the the performance and linking it to risks. I'll pick up non-elective first, UEC. So 3 risks, 6425. 6457 and 8247. Firstly, on UEC, we've been quite patiently awaiting our CQC report around the ED inspection, so it's good that's now arrived. It's going through the factual accuracy process, hoping that will be published in due course. It's nothing that we weren't expecting to see on that report, which is positive. In terms of the type 1 performance in ED, you will see on the IPR that it is in normal course variation below target, sitting around at 45% currently, with our target internally being 55%. As I mentioned earlier, we've got some immediate actions to improve that, mostly around the non-admitted. That's the way that will bump up the quickest. Trying to make sure we are navigating as many of the potentially non-admitted patients through the same day urgent care unit. Currently, we're getting 50% of the take through there, and we can push that further because the performance on non-admitted in that area is 10-20% better. So that's the plan there. Also, we've got a pilot running this month on just adjusting the balance of the short stay area and some of the AME cubicles between the ED and the AME teams as well, which will help go through the plan. So again, hoping that will see a spike in poor performance this month. Around ambulance handovers, we did see some improvement, but we're now in a period of normal course variation, and it's higher than we would like. So we are working with Cheshire and Mersey Ambulance Improvement Group at Aintree, running a pilot this month, focusing entirely on ambulance handovers, and we're beginning to see some improvement in that regard. As I've highlighted before, we're moving to the new drop 45, it's called. So this is where the ambulance reaches 45 minutes. The patient will then just be handed over to the ED team. So we're getting ourselves ready for that in Aintree. That will improve performance, but obviously we need to make sure the patients are safe when that process happens. Obviously, and whilst to make sure we're ready for that, we will begin that in July. In terms of other ED performance issues, the time to treatment remains really good performance at 64%, being treated within 60 minutes, and friends and family performance remains above target at 76% in ED. Just coming in onto the criteria to reside position, we've seen normal course variation, but a slight drop to 182 at the end of April for patients who are no criteria to reside in Aintree. As Nat has described, that balance between patients who are going to the room home, P1, and patients going to a nursing home has been maintained, and less people going to nursing homes and more people going home. The focus now on there is making sure that we're getting those sort of pathway one home patients home as quickly as we can, to the lives there above what we'd expect nationally, and hopefully that will improve the transfer of care hub plans that Nat has described. In terms of the effect of that, and coming back to your point, David, we have now closed our escalation areas. So Ward 25 is closed, the surge areas are closed, and we have a plan based on a reduction of trajectory of 20 no criteria reside patients per week, that we will be able to close a second ward in June and a third ward in July. Those are our targets. We know which ward we are closing in June, which is Ward 17. So we actually decided which was this to be a third ward, but that will be agreed in due course. So that will be the impact. And then, if Nat said, we'll reduce the from our patients, which will have then an impact on the admitted 4-hour performance cycle. So to answer that question. In terms of elective, there is some challenges with the entry, in particular around 65-week wage position. We have seen improvement as we previously reported to the end of March, but unfortunately there has been a deterioration in that area, particularly mostly around head and neck, so the specialties that we know are challenged, ENT in particular, but also some max fax patients. So that number has unfortunately increased to 581 by the end of May. 391 in ENT, 160 in max fax. So there is plans now in place. My team's working closely with the corporate ops team from that perspective to make sure that we are paying specific attention to pathway management and validation and making sure we're flowing patients through that process as effectively as possible. Also, we're looking at capacity demand and how we can increase capacity, particularly in ENT, to make sure we work through that backlog. We're expecting to see a reduction in June, and we're setting trajectories for recovery in Q2. Also, in terms of elective, there have been challenges around the diagnostic pathway, the DMO1, which is a 6-week elective diagnosis pathway, 2 specific areas. One is echocardiography, and there's a risk on the risk register on that, which is 8645. I think I've discussed this previously. We had appointed some physiologists in cardiology to address that, and so that we're now back in demand capacity balance, but we have a bit of a backlog to work through. So how we do that, but particularly want to use community diagnostic centres to work through that backlog, and so that is the plan for that. The second area is sleep, where we've had some sickness. Aintree is the regional sleep centre, so there's a lot of demand through that service. So if someone goes off sick, the target becomes challenged. I'm hoping that, I'm expecting that position to recover in a month, and that will then disappear. We have got some further plans around sleep, and we just want to bid for guided diagnosis, which is quite innovative around Cheshire and Mersey. So we're hoping to apply that across the patch with a single pathway, single waiting list, which would really help improve that sleep position going forward. So that's really good from Sonny Craig in particular, who's led the way of that. Let's pick up some of the finances. At the end of month 1, the interest surplus of 8 million, which is 1.3 million better than planned for month 1. Income, variable income was 0.23 million above plan. It's offset a little bit by pass-through drugs, but a good income position. Pay, as I mentioned earlier, was 0.5 million worse than the plan from month 1, mostly due to those escalation areas which are now closed, so hopefully we'll see improvement. And also linking to some mental health patients who remained in ED and on the wards who required one-to-one, so that's also a pressure on that. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, the sickness absence rate of 6.1% is also having an impact of that £500,000. Non-pay is essentially in balance when you take off some one-offs, as Matt described, site revalidation, etc. From a CIP perspective, in month we achieved 3.9 million, which is above the 2.7 billion target. 3.5 million, that's recurrent. We are expecting to hit month 2, and we have plans to hit Q1 around CIP. Finally, I just want to also just mention the major incident, go into it, but as Matt said, great response from both sites, and Aintree, it was great to see they just kicked into their usual EPR methods and was really calm and collected, and all the patients were seen and treated really effectively, and it was a pleasure to watch. So well done to the teams on that. And then finally, just on the IPR, the IPC measures are normal. So the infection prevention control measures are a normal cause variation. Importantly, we've not had any further MRSA bacteremia, which I've raised here before. Friends and family for outpatients and inpatients in ED are also all above target. And we continue to achieve venous thromboembolism prescription, which is all good to see. And I've mentioned sickness absence. So that's my report. Happy to take any questions on that. Thank you, James.
Yeah, since Pete, such as the NHS is an honor, since Pete started talking, a new urgent care plan has been released.
We must be for those two things linked.
We want another with a national mandated meeting at 1 o'clock today to take us all through it. So basically, they seem to have decided that, well, it actually says we can't wait for the publication of the 10-year plans. This comes back to Jim's point about being ready for this winter. So they've just released a 30-page urgent care plan for the NHS in the last few minutes. and there looks to be some new targets in there. Okay. So we're going to have to revisit those risks in the earlier, but at a quick glance, it supports sort of the direction of what we're trying to take, and it actually has quite a few things in there that are quite helpful around the focus on mental health trusts, and as we were just saying. So we'll obviously feed that into the conversation if we get into that. But I did just want to say on urgent care on the entry report, that treatment within 60 minutes metric is being maintained. Yeah. And I remember when we had the conversation about what you've done differently there, you know, would it last a week? Would it last 2 weeks? But it is being maintained, and the control limits here should have moved up. Yeah. I guess there's 4 above the, there's probably 5 above the upper control limit, isn't there? There is 5 above that upper control limit, yeah, so it will start to move. So that's a positive. And again, it feels like the urgent care side of things, whilst it's still really difficult, we're seeing some green shoots out, particularly the closure of some beds as well.
Very good. Other point questions? Yes.
Yeah, just on the bottom, I know it's under Jim's portfolio about research and innovation and the failure to meet commercial and commercial studies reaching targets because of the lack of nurses we have currently within research nurses. Now, there has a letter gone out from the Department of Health that's gone to all DOFs, and we're now having a light touch approach on that because they're externally funded, and hopefully they'll recruit to that, so that should go back up again.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete. Maybe more question 10. Seems to me that developing some key contingencies. It was the remark around the impact of design is the absolute driving for ward closure. Is there something we can do, particularly for a broad point, to get some visibility on those key contingencies? We want to see X over here, we need to see Y over here. Then we can do.
Yeah, it's happening. So within Pete's group transformation plan, he has projects linked to all the planning we need to do to enact those ward closures. There's detailed plans behind that. And we're moving the structure slightly. So from next month, Pete, Nat, Jenny, Beth, through their hospital reports. Sorry, we can't hear. We'll be reporting on their transformation plans. And from next month, I'll be bringing the first quarterly delivery assurance report on the group transformation plan as a whole. So that should be coming from next month.
Okay. Just people couldn't hear that. So going forward then, the Assurance Risk Committee will have the key corporate risks and the links to that. The board meeting will have more of, if you remember at the close down of the last board meeting with the previous year, Tim did a really good report on here's what the improvement plan done in the full year. We'll now see that in quarterly chunks through the boards. So we'll see both pieces.
It's in our papers to members at the back there. We're taking up to get some more hardware into this room.
Yeah, so there's going to be
project the sound.
Yeah, so we're in by the end of June. We're going to be putting wireless microphones and speakers into this room. We're waiting for our digital colleagues just to install them. So that will be in before the next meeting.
Thank you. Any other points for Peter? Okay. We need to come back to this overspending in month 1. We're all non-executives, we're all highly frustrated about this. And then the sort of the explanations of the escalations open. When we put the planning together, what did we expect to happen? That hasn't happened. And here we are again, we've lost the first 2 games of the season. It's hard to recover. So we'll pick that up in your report, Rob, but to be off anything so early in the year. We either got the plan wrong or we got the delivery wrong. My interpretation of what you said is a bit of both. Any other points on the entry? Thank you. Liverpool Women's Hospital, Jenny, and I should say we've had again, colleagues have submitted a number of questions in advance of the meeting that are essentially around some Liverpool Women's Service issues, and you'll pick those up in your update.
I will. I'll pick them up at the end of the update. Thank you, Chair, and I'll pick up the 62-day action within the performance section of my report. So if I just start briefly with the financial position, Liverpool Women's met the plan of an overall 1.2 million deficit. Within that, though, CIP was 0.3 million behind plan, but that was mitigated by non-recurrent balance sheet movements, which we know is not ideal. All of our £12.7 million CIP is identified, 11.3 million of which is recurrent, and we do continue to work on identifying the remaining 1.4 million. Just by way of context, the CIP portfolio board, which I chair, meets weekly as part of the monthly transformation board that Tim was talking about before, and we've got over 200 schemes working through that, so it is quite voluminous underneath that 12.7 million. Moving on to the high risk register, we've got 4 risks on the high risk register, including 2 new risks. New risk 2927 in relation to a risk to IPC service provision at Liverpool Women's, and that's just arising from changes in some of the medical and nursing resources within the IPC team. This has been escalated through the quality and safety group in terms of ability and resource at LWH. What we've seen is it's been linked to seeing we had 2 C. diff cases, 1 MRSA in the last 12 months, which is low numbers, but quite big for us. We don't normally see them. We're seeing increased community prevalence and some increased colonisation rates in neonates. So we've worked with the group team. We have had a review performed for us, which has identified an 8A role, which is required, which we've gone out to recruitment for. That starts in August, and also some additional medical support which is required. So whilst that's all coming into place, we're just recognising that we may have an enhanced risk as we just wrap around that DIPSI and infection prevention control support. Once that's in place, we would expect that to come back down again. There is a new risk at 3002 in relation to cash to cover obligations. We've obviously got the long-standing financial sustainability report, but we recognise that there are sufficient risks in relation to cash support. We have had cash support in the past as a separate statutory entity, but we know it's much more difficult in the current climate to receive that cash, and that's been recognised by the Finance Performance Group and escalated up. The pharmacy risk, just a brief update on that. The actions in the business case are progressing under the oversight of the Quality and Safety Group, and whilst the score stays the same at the moment, we're expecting that to start coming down as those actions start to take place and embed. And it's not in the report, but just something that is emerging at the moment, and that's just in relation to imaging capacity. We've talked about it here before. We've got high levels of sickness, again, impacting on our obstetric and non-obstetric ultrasound, but we're keeping that under review at the moment. In terms of our performance metrics, in terms of diagnostics DM01, again, just mentioned we've got some resource in relation, some concern in relation to the resource in that imaging team. We have seen the DM01 performance drop again, so we're keeping an eye on that. If I just reference our stillbirths, so there are 10.64 per 1,000 in the IPR, that equated to 6. You'll see it's 5.32 in the perinatal dashboard. And that's where we adjust the figure to exclude medical termination of pregnancies and stillbirths are over 24 weeks. What we're looking to do is put both on the IPR moving forward, so you can see them side by side. So that discrepancy is, but the difference is clearer for anyone triangulating those figures in the board. Sickness was at 5.94%, of which 6.6% is midwifery. We've got some high rates in midwifery at the moment, or relatively high rates for us. We are still fully established in midwifery, and that sickness is both short and long term, and the team are just working to help address some of that. We have no 65-week waits, but we are doing a deep dive on the waiting list and some enhanced validation at the moment. So any risk or issues identified will be escalated through my next EMD report, which I think will go now to ARC. So if I come back then to the 62-day cancer standard, and just so everyone's clear, the 62-day standard is where patients receive their cancer treatment within 62 days of an urgent referral of suspected cancer. That was 46% at March against our own full year target of 50%. The national target is 75%. And whilst we've seen some real improvements on the FDS, the faster diagnosis standard, through our one-step pathways, we're not seeing, whilst we are seeing improvement, we're not seeing ourselves at rates which we would like to be at on the 62-day standard. We knew we were focusing on the diagnosis standard first in support of the treatment standard. So we also know that gynaecology remains a specialty which is challenged nationally in terms of long wait capacity and growth in referrals. In Appendix 2 to my report, I've set out the background of us being in Tier 1 for cancer performance, and we will be in Tier 1 for Q1 of 25-26. We've been notified of that. And just to be clear, Tier 1 is the most challenged and requiring support. And we've obviously asked Bad Board to give some more context to that. And within that as well, I should also say that Liverpool Women's ranks unfavourably as well against some other providers. It's not, we recognise that we're not doing as well as some other providers as well. So just for some context, referrals into gynae suspected cancer pathways have significantly increased over the last 3 years, from 3,500 in 21-22 to 6,000 per year in 24-25, which is a 71% increase. And we know we've seen changes in the pathways, which have also exacerbated those referrals. And also just to note, we are the tertiary provider for Cheshire and Ramsey. Back in 2023, we identified the need to expand our hysteroscopy and ambulatory capacity, recognising the increase in demand, and we have had a business case approved that is progressing, and we will get 3 extra ambulatory rooms on the Crown Street site, which should go live September. Work is progressing well on those. You can see the building work going on site, and there was also some additional work for us to help increase that capacity. So we've seen this coming down the line. We've got business case, we rewarded the funding. Our challenge to ourselves now, though, is should we be accelerating that business case and getting that activity through quicker? It's not funded, so challenge for ourselves to take that away and give that some further consideration. We also note that gynecology cancers come with complex diagnoses. There's a lot of range of tests that come with that, which is less straightforward than perhaps some other specialities. And whilst we can still, as we can now do CT and MRI, etc. on our site, there's still a lot of tests that we can't do, and we are reliant on other providers for. We've also got high pre-op assessment delays. Just because of the general demand, we do prioritise cancer, but the demand is high through there, and occasionally we get late tertiary referrals from other organisations as well. So it's multifactorial in terms of the challenges we're facing. We've asked the corporate ops team to support us with a bit of a deep dive into some of the stuff and the actions that we're doing, and perhaps if there's any more that we can do. They've performed that in the last few weeks for us, which was really, really helpful, but identified a few themes which they are helping support with around our data and some of the PTL, the patient tracking list contents, and what we can do about managing some of that. Clinical pathways, how we improve those, patient management, again within the patient tracking list, and just looking at some of our Tier 1 meetings and how we're working through those. That's resulted in an action plan which we've appended to the report, which we will take back and work through, and also some trajectories in relation to that. The conversation that Beth and I have been having more recently is are those trajectories ambitious enough in terms of if we put all these actions in place, can we improve that performance even more? So that just gives you the kind of oversight as to where we are with that. So really good support from the corporate ops team with that fresh eyes view, and we will work through the recommendations of the action plan to see if we can improve those trajectories over the coming year.
Okay.
Okay. So just finally from me then, just to note that CQC performed an unannounced inspection of maternity. I'm trying to think, was it last month? Where are we now? June, May. Yes. There were no immediate safety concerns arising from that, and actually they were really impressed with the Family Health Division when they were presenting the improvements they've made since the last inspection. It was a joy to see, actually, all those things that have been put in place. So great to see that, and we'll expect their report hopefully later this month, perhaps into July. We'll get our report. So that was positive in terms of no immediate safety concerns. Also to note, at our HMB, we discussed our internal audit assurance report for the end of the year. The head of internal audit opinion is coming out with substantial assurance. So a lot of work in providing additional evidence to our position over the last few weeks. And Tracy might in her report, we moved that into substantial assurance. It did drop briefly to moderate, so we caught that back. I'll pick up this team and perinatal dashboard later on the agenda. One of the issues about HMB was a change to safety standard 9, which talks about the ability to formally delegate responsibility from to the committee of the board rather than the board itself. The chair of the Quality and Safety Committee proposed that deep dive monthly review continues at the HMB, at the Hospital Management Board, but that we bring a quarterly, more thematic review to the board in terms of the issues and escalate as they come through. So that's something for us to consider as a board, whether we would want to do that and have that real deep depth of scrutiny at the Hospital Management Board and with the LONS and the safety champions, etc. But a more thematic review here is now acceptable rather than all the detail coming to the board. So I'll break there for questions before I go on to the
James first. Yeah, the additional rooms, just remind. Sorry, we modelled in the capacity that that's going to give us to the improvement plans for the cancer staff.
Not yet. So I've asked the team to do that. We accelerated that business case. What would it give in 25, 26? Because it's phased over a number of years at the moment.
Yeah, because I was being asked that question when the regional director visited the other week about the gynae cancer stand. What somewhere needs to be, what's happening with that investment. So that is going to start profiling in the future, not yet.
Yeah, well, so the element of this year is the difficulty we've got is it's not funded. There's a new part of the revenue is funded. The capital is funded, and an element of this year's plan is funded. If we accelerate any further and bring those rooms on board and the workforce more quickly, it will be a cost pressure to the budget.
Okay. Right, so there might be a negotiation.
Yes,
somewhere on that. Thank you. You answered my other one, just let me.
Check that, please. Again, lots to congratulate in the report. It's really good stuff going on. People working very hard. On the 62-day target, you've had 2 years of being on the naughty step in effect, haven't you, with the oversight by NHS, which brings its own demands and capacity. Could you give an indication when you think, for assurance, when we get back to at least level 2 of the intervention, and then getting off the naughty step, very naughty step?
Yeah, so not at the moment. The work with the Cancer Alliance through the tier 1 meetings, they're quite satisfied with the actions that we've been taking so far, but they're not yet minded to take us out of tier 1, and there's no indication how, I think, through Beth's team and myself, is that negotiation for what the we are going to struggle to reach the national standard within 12 months. But what would be an acceptable standard with them at the moment to bring us out, but they're keeping us in tier 1, despite the fact that if you look at performance over the last 12 months, 2 years, it has significantly improved, just not to where it needs to. And nobody is at the 75%.
It's great when you see the regulator, not negotiating properly in terms of what you need to do to be at least off the very naughty step.
Yeah. And I think that is a fair challenge from the board as to what we need to do.
James, this is another example of it's a bit like benchmarking sickness before. If the cancer target was lapsed, we wouldn't be on the naughty step. The separation of specialist hospitals in Liverpool completely exposes individual specialties in a way that than any other organisation. So if you're a big city hospital elsewhere, gynae is at 50% and everything else is at 70%. You're not in tier 1. That's probably wrong because there should be equity across the specialties, but it just shows again how we get sort of picked out because an entire hospital is effectively being judged on one single standard, which in every organisation is a real challenge for workforce and demand reasons.
The frustration thing I pick up from your question, your response, Jenny, is this isn't a clear rules-based criteria set for when you come out from one tier to another. It's more of a of a subjective judgment.
It is a subjective judgment to a degree, but equally, if you make a ton of progress on the metrics you get out, we proved that with London, and the progress is just as well. So if you look at the report over a year, yes, there's improvement, but it's marginal. Now, again, there's lots of reasons for that, and we understand that, but we're just going to have to do everything we can to try and increase the speed of that, because if we shifted to a rank of middle by now, we wouldn't be in tier 1. We haven't. So we've just got to take over the chin and make sure that this action plan actually delivers some further improvement.
Yes, Beth.
So I attended the tier 1 meeting yesterday, so we're doing a refresh. I think it's fair to say on what Jenny's just said, that there has been a phase 1, and there have been improvements demonstrated in phase one. What they're wanting to see though is nearer to the target. They have not made a commitment of when they would see if we demonstrated that the actions were resulting in better outcomes for patients in terms of access times, etc. But they did intimate that the meetings might be monthly, which is a good indication. And they also said it was intimated around a 6-month maybe review. They didn't give an indication that it would clearly be for the remainder of the year. So we're going to do everything we can to set out the trajectories, and every time we meet, so long as we are demonstrating improvement against that trajectory, I think we're in with a good chance to maybe by the end of this calendar year, not financial year. So that would be the aim.
Okay, that's good. Pretty good. David, please.
You mentioned in the report that one of the issues for a complex gynae patient, cancer patient, is that you don't have an ICU around the site. Is there discussion with our other sites that do have an ICU so we can get those patients operated on other sites?
Yeah, we do them at the Royal, but there's only so many we can get the long, complex patients, and there's only so many we can do in the normally one in the day that we have our MDT working over there and the ITU access. So it's capacity in those other sites as well.
Shall I pick up the questions?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So I've got responses to these, which I'll publish. A couple of questions coming from earlier in the board pack. And that was regarding the women's services in Liverpool. Has the suggestion of a new build at Liverpool Women's at the Royal site been raised with staff either at the Royal or LWH? So just for a bit of context, so the options appraisal that's currently underway through the Women's Services Committee is being led by the ICB. That's not concluded yet, and the options are currently under review, but previous reviews of women's services have included rebuild options at the Royal sites, which have been communicated with both the Liverpool Women's and Royal staff, and we'll see the latest outcomes of the ICB's review, hopefully relatively quickly. Another question on the future of the women's as an entity, recognising that the hospital management board may be amended in the future based on recommendations from the NHS Cheshire and Mersey's current review. Does it imply that Liverpool Women's Hospital could cease to exist as an entity? No. The ICB review is looking at delivery of hospital maternity services. Liverpool Women's itself as a statutory entity isn't affected by that review. That's not to say we won't make any changes to how we deliver and manage services in the future, but they're not connected. And then a question, read board papers on 42, it states LWH public consultation regarding women's services in the city, including economic considerations. To which consultation does this refer? This refers to any potential consultation coming out of the options appraisal from the ICB work on women's services, but we don't know if there will be one at the moment or when that will be. So that's a potential consultation arising from the work that's currently ongoing.
There was a real focus on this, wasn't there, when we went through the engagement and listening process in the last calendar year, and an expectation that
it's all.
So you don't know what the timescale.
No, it's all on track.
Yeah.
It wasn't due to. I think that people kept getting confused between the engagement and the consultation, and the engagement piece has been done. The stage that is there in a monthly options appraisal, so it's effectively taking the huge long list of options and working through it. There was something like 60 or 70 people in a room on Monday, which included lay members, lived experience people, Health Watch and others, as well as a lot of clinicians who went through, trying to get a very long list of options that there were to solve this problem into a shorter list that fairly become part of an options appraisal. That's due to deliver, I think, over the next few weeks. Then it goes back to the committee, and then at a point in time, those options would then become part of any consultation that may be required. So it's all going to plan, but consultation, if there's a need for consultation, that's the back end of this year, isn't it? It's sort of later this year.
Okay, thank you. Any other points? Okay, thank you. Our final slide report then is the diagnosis treatment centre management.
Thursday and the report. And we have 2 risks at 12 in LCL, and that relates to strike action in microbiology, and also the recruitment and retention of staff, particularly in blood sciences. I just will note here that strike action did take place on the 22nd and 23rd of May. It was planned strike action on the 27th, but due to the incident, that's the water street incident, that staff came in on that day. I would like to make a note here at board to show my appreciation for those staff who did stand down the strike action, and to express my thanks, because people did come into work and they supported the team. So just wanted to put that on record. We have had an indicative ballot for future strike action in blood sciences, but we've had no confirmed date as yet. And I have checked that this morning from HR. And whilst they have intimated further strike action in microbiology, we've yet to receive a date of that in future strike action. I did meet with Unite representation on Monday, and we are working through the issues that they continue to raise. Strike action. The only other 12 risk, there is a new 12 risk in pharmacy, and that is relating to the delivery of the CIP. And we are working through plans. There are a number of issues we just need to address in terms of some investment in staff in pharmacy last year, which is now being included in the CIP. So as I said, working through that kind of adjustment with pharmacy. In terms of the general work in progress, there are 4 things I will pull out. One relates to staff survey. We now have the results of our staff survey for the 3 discrete sites, and so we are developing action plans in response to those specific areas. We haven't had that before in that way, so thanks to HR for helping us do that. Secondly, we have now got an IPR for pharmacy and imaging, which was not in place before. So Digital have managed to turn that round for me within 6 weeks, so thank you to them. We now can develop improvement trajectories against the metrics contained in that IPR, and you will see that included in the next board report. I did have first draft, and there were some tweaks that need to be made, but at least we do have that now in place to support discussion at the HMB. Number 3 is around the workforce plans. Not only do we have to reduce the headcount in accordance with the expectations across the system, but I also want to align the workforce plans more to demand. So I have 3 check and challenge meetings set up for those 3 areas over the next couple of weeks to shore up the workforce plans. And finally, the 4th point I want to pull out is around the structures and governance in each of the areas. I think we need to make sure that we are fully aligned to the site structures and the group, how we can use our resources to best effect. And finally, I did speak to James yesterday around some ideas I have of how I increase capacity and bandwidth to deliver the change that I want to see in the areas. So yes, James was supportive of that, and that will be getting implemented over the next weeks.
It's very positive again. What question, James?
I should know the answer to this, so apologies for embarrassing myself slightly, but the implementation of the phlebotomy system, what is that related to? What's the phlebotomy system? Is that the blood stuff? Blood 360, right, thank you.
There's some issues, it's not just.
I know phlebotomy blood stuff, by the way. That's
red.
Yes. No, it was the blood 360 was the thing. Is that what that's related to?
Well, in addition to that, it's also the environment, which staff are unhappy with the environment and not being conducive, not only for their working environment, but also for patients. So there are some solutions, and I've got a walkabout in the diary. I've already been, but I think there are some ideas that we can have to improve and address those risks raised.
That's good. That's been outstanding for a while, hasn't it? So implementation in August is good. Thank you. Mike, please.
Thanks, Beth. Can you just give us a flavour of the status of the conversations around actually is it stalled, is it constructive, is it difficult, is it positive? What's the flavour?
Constructive. I think there's been some long-standing issues which people don't feel have been satisfactorily addressed. I'm not standing in judgment of that. I'm just receiving the messages that I'm hearing. I think there are some things that we do need to signal some change. And there is going to be some change, like I've just alluded to. I just need to ensure that I have the capacity to do that at pace. So they are constructive. They are sharing with us their thoughts. I am not only meeting with the Unite representative, I'm also meeting with people within the service who are telling me things, and I am reaching out for some evidence to support some of the claims that they're making in terms of their working life and etc. So yeah, it is constructive at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, please. Same point really. There's this very strong staff dissatisfaction going along with LCL for a while, which the strike action is an obvious manifestation, but it's been there for quite a long time. So I'm glad we've got that on your plate and tackle.
It's really interesting, this one. So getting down to actually the real detail of what the issues are, because what we've seen is over the last year, a real improvement in every people metric, haven't we? Appraisals are good, all of the role specific trainings, or people are doing the mandatory training. Everybody's getting, even sickness absence has come down, staff retention is the best it's ever been. Yet there's still this underlying issue that you're sort of digging into now. So it'll be really interesting to see what we get to as a result of that, because everything else feels sort of like it's in track. I know that the issues you're describing are specific to a group of this service rather than everybody. But there has been, as Tom said, just this general sort of awful staff survey year on year, despite all the things that would usually point to an improved culture. So yeah, we'll look forward to hearing more about that.
It's good to see that from the staff survey there have been improvements across all areas, but there continues to be red risks throughout phlebotomy, for example. That's because of environment and everything else, which have, as James said, has been a long-standing issue. And although the metrics, the people metrics, like James has just described, are all achieving what they need to achieve, the issue remains that they don't feel as if they're being heard. And they don't feel as if they're being heard by managers within the service. So whilst the metrics is saying that is their perception, and that's what I need to get under, which is more of the listening to people and then trying to, you said we did. Yeah.
Okay. Jeffrey, please.
Mike and Tom asked my first question, and I get the sort of you need to be heard, and I think there's also something that, because the indicators are very positive, and I just wanted to ask about the sickness absence, which has fallen quite a lot. Is that due to managing long-term absence? You get a couple of people who are removed. Is that the?
Yes.
Any final points? Okay, good report, thank you. Good progress. Clear picture of where we are at and where we're going. Time now for a short break. If we could sit back down
Yeah, so I just wanted to preface Rob's proposal with a bit of a comment really on the recognition of where we are and the plan and the issues about being off plan at month one. And I know that's a big issue for all trust, isn't it? But we do have to come back to the thing that I feel slightly like the exec managing director would have to drive slightly on this stuff because we've got, you know, stretch put into the plans at the last minute, which every organisation's had to take across the system. Fine, we've all agreed that before, so that's fine. But it's been added in at the end, and we've got the sort of mandate. Then that has to be split equally. You can't have a hockey stick. So we're going to give you an extra amount of CIPD plan at the 11th hour that no one knows how they're going to get to yet, or we're going to assume you deliver it from the 1st of April. Well, but there's some real specifics in here that really do create problems for us that the teams are working on, and I can see developments on. So like the stuff in gastroenterology at the Royal, we just had £6 million taken away from the organisation out of the budget because they wouldn't pay for waiting lists budgeted. It's just an instant pressure on month one, and as Matt said, there's plans to now reduce the run rate of that and try and resolve that, but they didn't want to take the activity away. Still want the activity, but they'll take the cost out. We've had the same issue about the RTT plans. So when we, as a board, agreed that our plan should be reduced financially, then the RTT percentage should come down. Then we just got a direct instruction from the national team that had to be put back to the target that they are asking for. And you need to find it through productivity, which again, you know, you can't do from day one. So I think what we've got to recognise is that we aren't where we need to be, and that's clear. The situation, if you take all those ins and outs, what I could hear today from the sites was effectively that's a problem that's been landed on me at the 11th hour. Here's what I'm doing about it. And I can see things that are going to improve that. And in particular, the beds as well. I think we were really fortunate to get a risk share around UEC because UEC has afforded the ability for money to be put back in to the system to support the beds until they can be taken out, and we can therefore have a CIP effect. So that's really going to help, particularly at elementary, as we go forward. So, you know, I just think we needed to take it in the context of the way this works is it just gets divvied out to these hospitals, and they just have to deal with it, whether they've got the plans in place or not. On the converse, we've got to get better on the identification of the CIP out of red and into amber, because that is always the pressure for us. And when we look at the pay issue in month one, largely, not entirely, but a lot of that is undelivered CIP, as I've said, because the plan's been expanded, but we're still too slow in getting the rest of them. And I think that's an area where if you're going to come in and take a little more, we're just not being able to shift all of that extra stretch as quickly as we the final bit I want to say is that we really need to think about the plan for this financial plan for this year, CIP plan for this year, in sort of three separate stages, I think. One is we started with a plan that was equal to what NHS England tell us is achievable for Loved and for the Fulhams. So we started with a plan that was doable because you think it is and we think it is. Then we got a second load of stretch. And that second load of stretch was we needed to go 18 million, 20 million further, but we wanted to put urgent care in. And as I said, we did that on the basis we got a risk share. And I think we've seen some green shoots today of being able to get to that, provided the trajectories that we've got keep going. That third stretch came with no clue of how to do it and was just divvied out across every organisation in Cheshire Merseys in an attempt to get to a plan. We're heavily reliant on the last work for that third stretch because there isn't, logically, more we can get out of the organisations where the benchmark tells us it's not there. So we're really reliant on that last work to do that. We'll come on to this later in the private board session, just around where we are on all of that. But the risks for us sit around not being able to do the last stuff quick enough to get that stretch met, because at the moment that stretch is featuring multiple performance as undelivered because of the way we've got to profile plans. So I think there's something about making sure we're confident on what we originally said and now are we doing that? I think it's down to all these guys. Urgent care is going to be the big thing, and we've all said it today. The criteria to resign has to translate to corridor closure, bed closure, and we're starting to see it, but there's a lot more to do. And I think we'll pick that up in our, as you said earlier, David. And then this third bit is how are we going to get this last stuff delivered earlier if we're going to make that stretch, because it isn't sitting within the organisations by any of the benchmarking that we give. So I just wanted to provide that. It's very helpful. Thank you, Robert.
Right, yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And the context to just build on that, we've got an awful lot of scrutiny at the moment and support across the system and across reaching into the trust. So, System Improvement Director, Mandy Nagra, she has many meetings each week, including a very robust one this morning on nursing that David got rightly exalted for his professionalism to take the alpha system. But she's meeting with all the functions, chief execs, CFOs on a daily basis and getting into a really load of details. That's one level of scrutiny and support we're getting. NHS are supporting us also, looking at finances. An ex-CFO, Simon Worthington, has been helping. He's been scrutinising Cheshire and Mersey's CIP plan. Spent a full day with Luff last week and went through in a heck of a lot of detail all the plans. As James said, we've got a good report on the way we're structured, but probably some feedback will be on moving quicker through the RAG rating. And then as a system, PwC are currently doing a diagnosis of the financial plan for the system, and Stephen Hay and Damien Ashford are leading the programme partners from PwC to look at all trusts and include the system in that. And I think we've got a session with them next week. So there's a heck of a lot going on. And of course, that's in the context of us having effectively a corporate recruitment freeze. So getting more asks for that. So I think it's just worth noting. The reports there, again, because of we've enhanced a little bit, so you'll see just to navigate, you'll see the sections. We've got the individual look report, the Liverpool women's report. We've added in run rate details. We've added in the up-to-date CIP plans, and what we've also added is a last overview that gives a view of the 5 trusts as well. That kind of get the ICB. So that's the report. In terms of the numbers, starting with the system, as was mentioned, an original plan of £250 million deficit, 225 million was rejected, back down to 178 million deficit. So that's the plan for the system at month 1. They were on plan, delivering an 18.5 million deficit. That's good news. 100,000 better plan. In terms of UHLG, you can see Liverpool Women has delivered plan in month, which was fabulous, 1.2 million deficit. Luff we're slightly ahead of plan, 2.6 million against a 2.7 million plan, which is again positive outcome. In terms of the CIP driving that, as Jen's mentioned, we're slightly behind. Identified schemes were catching up, but we're able to patch the difference. The Luff story was slightly different. We had a site revaluation that we talked about through this trust board over the past year. That came into play at the start of the year and gave us a benefit of 3.2 million in month 1. And that meant that our CIP, we delivered £9.6 million versus a plan of 6.8, 2.8 million above CIP targets. That was great as a one-off. However, that was offset by the overspends that we've talked about. In terms of the key points within that, as has been mentioned, pay remains our challenge. 3.5 million over plan in month. If you look at our on a run rate basis, Our average run rate for the year ahead needs to be 73.1 million. We spent 78.1 in, so we've got 5 million off our average run rate. So all the things we've just talked about, the ward closures, the capacity constraints, and that's really important. There are other projects going on as well. Things like a consistent bank rate across Cheshire and Merseyside, which again, Mandy Nagra kind of is helping get consistency. There's no point one organisation doing it and then all the staff jump over to another one. So things like that are being really helpful, but need to happen for us to meet our plan. Non-pay, we looked through ahead of plan. So if you look again at the average run rate needed, 35.2 million a month. We spent 34.9 in month one, so that's positive. But bear in mind, we had that benefit of the ratio. Other items just to note, we have signed off capital plans in both organisations, and that includes some nationally sponsored schemes and supported schemes like the RAC development, and we've got a paper on that in part 2. We are looking at that, at our spending capital as well. Clearly, we've got to manage the cash, which I'll come on to. So in month one, for example, in Look, we spent £500,000. So we spent £300,000 against the £500,000 target, slightly below, as we're managing expenditure. That's important because cash remains an issue for us. We've got £7 million in the bank at Liverpool Women's, we've got 14.3 million at the end of month one at Love, about 4 days worth. Now, we're managing that. Deficit support funding is within both of those plans, and that's being paid at the moment. That is dependent on us hitting the plan, so it's a catch-22. We've got to keep on plan, but we don't get the deficit support funding, which puts us further off plan. At the moment, we are on plan. And if we hit our plan, we will not require further support, cash support, if it was available in Love. Liverpool Women is slightly different. There is a potential that we will require it, but we're working across UHLG and across LASP partners to try and manage the cash, because we do have cash in the LASP system, and that's one of the advantages of working together. In terms of, you'll see we've got an underlying financial plan that we're underlying deficit that we've included in the report. We're working and have worked really closely with NHS on that. I think that will probably become a standard for reporting underlying deficit across the Northwest at least. Still a little bit of work to do, but we're giving an indication. I'll continue to report that. And then in terms of risks, overall, definitely a financial sustainability risk of 12, as highlighted. The two key areas are CIP, and we will continue to be challenged to identify the gaps and accelerating through delivery and delivery of the expenditure plan, which is contributed to with the overspends in areas. Cash is just underneath that as we're managing that amongst the group, but remains a high risk area. So happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Sarah first.
So I guess just aligning to the context, James, that you shared at the start, which is important, I understand, but I guess from an assurance perspective, if we phased it in those three ways, this is the plan that we said we could deliver against. How are we performing against that? So, we got confidence then that the things that we thought we could do, we would do, we're delivering against, and then how do we look at that iteratively, how that kind of exacerbates the gap? I think when you look then at some of the challenges in month one being overspend, opposed to a lack of delivery stretch, that indicates to me that we probably don't have the assurance that what we said we would do in the first instance, we've got a handle on. So how do we kind of differentiate between those so we know the things that are within our gift, we're doing the right things, and then we're just responding to the stretch for the English opportunity.
So we might be best putting that in workforce terms. So in those three buckets, we had an original plan.
Sorry, can you please speak up?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll do my best. We had an original workforce plan of 800, 805 headcounts. Aligned to our CIP plans for 817 headcounts. We've got some further schemes. The second bucket of around about 232 whole times associated with things like the reduction in bank rates, look at tackling WLIs, premium pay, etc. And then we've got a third bucket that relates to there's 113 allocated to. And if we accelerate and achieve even the corporate targets in last 140 full-time equivalents, but clearly that's dependent on us getting that mobilised. So we've got a line of sight, but we've got original CIP plans to hit the original target, but we're working through these additional stretches, a lot of which require last, but also system partners.
So with the original plan, would we have anticipated that we would have been off on the plan and it would catch up because we were looking at differentiated phasing?
I'm sorry, this is really important material. The public have a right to know, and we cannot hear. Can you speak up?
Well, could you ask a bit more politely, please? Did you hear that?
I heard it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I know I'm going to go back and talk to an awful lot of people and have to tell them that I couldn't hear.
You can just raise your hand and tell us that politely, and then we'll.
I've done it twice, James.
Yeah.
Okay, so the point was, so against the original.
Yeah,
so
so
could
with
we
the
anticipate? So
anticipated deficit.
the difficulty with this is that we could anticipate that winter does not, for example, end on the 31st of March. The difficulty is that in the funding regime, the view is that winter does end on the 31st of March, and therefore we're just simply not funding you for the corridors or the escalator boards. Now, we will manage to get 50% of that funding through, so that was a good negotiation, but there was another 50% clearly that wasn't funded. So that's another yeah. So we could anticipate it was going to happen, but unfortunately that didn't change the funding equation.
If you look at it in those three buckets, effectively, if you look at the unidentified, that's pretty much equal to the additional stretch we got in the third lot. And the sort of differential, if you like, in that middle bit is that 50% of urgent care that isn't funded by us, that's sort of in our costs. So we're broadly there.
Okay, that's helpful.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Rob. A couple of things. I like the mapping against the well-led and the last metric, so that would really help to see. So thank you for that. I think it's probably some effect to Sarah. I think that this paperwork's got to do much more heavy lifting than it does now. And it's not a benign context. So I think this paper's facing two ways. One is our own internal understanding, and it's a primary thing. And the second thing is how we are read externally. And it seems to me that what we do is we report internally and then we do our explanation. And there's always good reasons. And so I thought, James, your explanation up front was brilliant and really, really helpful. I just think we've got to get that as mainstream part of the paperwork. So we can say, this is our understanding of our financial context. This is where we're working. These are the drivers around ward closures or whatever it is, the key things that are happening. These are the three buckets or whatever language we're going to put on it. We get that and we have that as standard context. And then we're reporting on these key drivers. What are the movements there? Because it feels to me then it gets away from what will be read externally as to, yeah, you're already off track currently and you're trying to find balance sheet offsets. And that That's not the real story. The real story is a much more mature story that we're telling in this meeting. But I think we tend to do that by way of subsequent explanation rather than upfront. I think we've got to reverse it because these people, it's got to do a lot of heavy lifting.
Very good. Right, Tracy, please.
Everything that's been said, and it's really difficult at the beginning of the year and we're off on whatever, but we heard the context that we're going to change. We're going to be doing a 3-year plan plus an extra 2 years, and that's going to come early and, you know, in the next couple of months. We're already in June. There's one thing about us tracking our recurrent position, but as we go off plan, we need to have other mitigations and recurrent things, non-recurrent things to put in place. And other things will slip, and other things we need to bring forward. And we need to somehow move from what we've got at the moment into thinking about that 3-year plan and how things are going to move and shift as we go through to keep up, you know, that corrective action. Because as we sort of talked at board before, we don't want that gap widening, but we need to be able to plot it through a longer period because we always seem to be focusing on just the year in hand, and we can't do that, can we? Because particularly with what we're doing as a group, I think we've got to sort of see how that segs into that next work, particularly if it's going to be done in the summer, really. We're almost there.
Yeah, great. Just to respond, absolutely. And so we've got the LSCB to agree to fund the PwC work to support all of the 5 trusts to effectively develop a single 3-year plan. So that will be really helpful because it will be additional capacity for us, paid for, not by us, for change, which will be useful. So Rob's already had some engagement with them on how we can start building that 3-year view for each of the organisations in the same way. We just need to make sure it links to the regional finance director's view of what those plans are going to look like in the summer.
Yeah.
So we will have some expert advice and capacity that we've not had before to do.
This is our base, isn't it? So
yes,
it's how it shifts.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, they'll help us work through. It's not just around the case for change on lands, it's effectively the financial position of each of the organisations, the history through to them, where does it land us. So we know, for example, we've got other lands trusts who have posted surpluses since they were established, who move into underlying deficit next year. That's how something is.
Exactly. We need to be able to plot it longer term.
To Mike's point, I entirely agree with Tracy's. We're turning the tank around, aren't we, in a way? And I think what the narrative's got to show is it's moving, not just keep running in the wrong direction, but actually continue moving. Otherwise, the regulators will just see what they're in front of the nose today. I think anything we can do to help that narrative will be helpful to us and also to the regulators.
So, yeah, I think some of the work on the underlying position that we've been working with NHSE on, I think that will start to show that we're not where we want to be, but actually we're turning that tide and expect to continue that trajectory, which is really important. Just on the 3-year stuff, so just after this board, but we did have a 3-year plan as well, and it's worth noting that look, we always said that over the 3 years, as you go through the internal efficiency improvements, the productivity improvements, you quickly get in those following years to the need to collaborate and look towards something wider, in this case, LASP. So, we've been flagging that for a long time, that has to be part of the solution.
Okay, so I think the format and the structure of the report that we've got this time helps significantly in understanding lots of the dynamics we've been talking about, the additional workforce in times. I think that one of the reasons we're chasing down such a huge cost improvement programme to deliver the plan is because in previous years we've not been able to make the recurring savings that we set out to rolling forward. And so we're always playing catch up. And one of the things that we're really trying to do this year, as we've discussed previously, is get more ahead of that so that we manage the year in the year properly. And therefore, you're right, Rob, to highlight that in profile terms, we're on plan, which is necessary. But to me, it's not quite sufficient because we're on plan, but by doing things to compensate for critical areas being off plan. And this simply contributes to that dynamic of stacking up bigger problems further. So I think we do need to get on the front foot and get ahead of it. And the key indicator of that is around whole-time equivalent numbers and pay budget. And in the context that you described, James, just ask you to think about how we can get to a credible and achievable plan on the workforce from here on, that we can meaningfully track progress against and understand where there's variance and why. And only then can we take mitigating action, deal with that element, as opposed to compensating action elsewhere to get us to the same. That's the key bit. Yeah. Any further points or questions? Thank you. Right, Peter, you're on the next two items. We start with sexual safety charter, please.
It's not what somebody very so we've got two papers to bring to the today. So first of which
I can't hear you now, sorry. Thank you.
So the first of which we're going to talk about is the Sexual Safety Charter. And this paper aims to provide the Board of Directors with an update on the progress made in implementing the NHS Sexual Safety Charter across both Liverpool Women's Hospital and also the Liverpool University Hospitals collectively. The paper also, from colleagues, will see that it outlines the next phase of work in the alignment of the Charter with our statutory requirements under the Worker Protection Act. And that's basically a legal requirement and legal duty as an employer to put responsible steps in place to prevent sexual harassment at work. So in December 2023, both Liverpool University Hospitals and Liverpool Women's Hospital signed the NHS Sexual Safety Charter, and that comprises of 10 pledges and core commitments that aim to provide staff and patients with unwanted sexual behaviour. The three core areas that we focused on as part of the Charter around establishing a zero tolerance culture, equipping staff to be able to speak up and respond appropriately as an organisation, and then also to ensure data transparency. There's kind of 3 or 4 key critical elements. So what I will do is just pull out some core key achievements. So the first of which, both organisations are in the final stages of consultation with our trade union colleagues to launch a new sexual misconduct policy. That's literally due for sign-up probably in the next weeks. We should be seeing that hitting the organisation in the next month. And that just outlines the definition of what unwanted sexual behaviour and harassment is. So from a simplicity perspective, all of the reporting pathways and then the support offered to affected individuals. So that's the policy element that will be coming into the organisation relatively soon. From a line management and a training perspective and an upskilling perspective, there are a number of programmes that have been launched across both organisations to support leaders, managers and colleagues from an awareness perspective, but also from a difficult and challenging situations. So from a line management perspective, Loft have been working with a local charity, the Rape and Sexual Assault Merseyside charity, and have designed and delivered a series of line management training. And Liverpool Women's have launched their Understanding Sexual Safety in the Workplace training. Both are receiving really positive feedback. Liverpool Women's have seen a 24% attendance of their line managers to date, and Loft approximately 12%. Recurring challenges, of course, around colleagues being able to be removed to attend some of those sessions. So we are looking at delivery of different training methods and potentially collectively adopting Liverpool Women's mandatory sexual safety e-learning module that they launched in March. So we're looking at addressing those. And then from a data capture and monitoring perspective, it's a key component and a key commitment that we enhance internal opportunities and mechanisms for colleagues to be able to report. Currently, Liverpool Women's utilise an anonymous reporting approach, and they've reported 3 cases in the past 12 months. Loft is looking at adopting that approach basically. We utilise different types of incident kind of escalation through freedom to speak up and other kind of mechanisms that we have internally, but we are looking at putting in as an addition the anonymous reporting, so we have that across the organisation. So Look has seen an increase in reported incidents in the past 12 months across Aintree, the Royal and Community Services. So we've seen 40 reported incidents in the year compared to 27 in the previous year. So there is clear evidence there's an increase in that. However, we will be paying attention to the fact that this potentially will also demonstrate that colleagues are more comfortable with raising some of those issues and more confident to kind of challenge what inappropriate sexual behaviour looks and how they experience it. But it's important to note to the board, isn't it, that the group does apply a zero tolerance approach to sexual misconduct. So that's really critical as an organisation position. And quarterly case reviews are in place for HR colleagues and trade union colleagues to learn from lessons to make sure that we continue to create this space for colleagues to raise those, but also that we've got ways in which we can address it and in time look to bring those down through a confidence perspective. And just a really nice point to note is UHLG are now part of the NHS Sexual Safety Charter Community of Practice. And we've recently presented our approach and the successes and have been asked to facilitate a train approach to the national team. And so therefore being recognised as leading organisations in this agenda, albeit we're on a journey. Okay, so within the paper, there's a detailed overview of the recommendations for areas of focus for 25-26. All of these will be incorporated into both people and culture strategic areas of priority and also site-based people plans, so through the executive teams. But in summary, they focus on kind of further driving line management engagement, confidence and compliance, the expansion of the trainer-trainer approach through multi kind of levels of delivery, improvements of the reporting systems and an alignment on the practices across Liverpool Women's and Loft. And the board will also be receiving a bespoke development session to focus really on raising awareness and responsibility at board level for this really critical agenda. So that's, and we're working with corporate governance to get the date plan for that. So in summary, the act of the board then is to receive assurance regarding the progress that's been made around the implementation plan, and also to support the recommended areas of focus for 25-26 that are outlined in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good report. Points, question, and you know, it's, as we discussed previously, our zero tolerance approach. We need to anyway reaffirm all of that.
Yeah.
Fit your terms. Sarah first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really good report and good to see the focus. Just in terms of the unwanted behaviour received from patients and the public, have we got particular hotspots for that other particular departments that we need to offer more support to that are more susceptible to?
Yeah, so I think from a Loft perspective, we can certainly see that. We obviously can't for the women's because it's anonymised.
Yeah.
But David leads a group which kind of looks at bullying, harassment and sort of the kind of the patient-facing elements as well. So potentially there's an opportunity there to.
Yeah, I think with regard to the sort of sexual assault or sexual assault or inappropriate sexual behaviour, I guess there are two areas within our organisation. One of them is within the business department, and that's for a whole number of reasons. And the other area, sadly, is within our elderly medicine area. And again, a part of that, I believe, and that's my belief, it's around the vulnerability of the people that are there.
It may be good to see how that factors into the plans moving forward.
Absolutely.
In our areas that
and although it is small numbers, but it's too many small numbers.
Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, Beth. It's the training compliance and the commitment to all managers meeting their training. What's the realistic time frame on that, given where we are?
Yeah. Well, bearing in mind, I think Liverpool is at 24%. We're at about 12. We are looking at it. I guess we could increase the compliance figures as long as there's right through any learning approach. So that's what we're trying to look at the moment. The women's have had huge success with that, and they kind of put regular kind of feedback loops, make sure that it's still relevant. So we would have to work and are working really closely with each of the hospital leadership teams to identify trajectories on a number of kind of things that we need to look at. We have a population of about 1,400 leaders and managers across the organisation, so that's the size of the ask at the moment. And if we equate that to whether it's an hour session, it's a chunk of time to be able to pull. So I think the model that we're reviewing at the moment is what's the delivery model for that. and working with each of the hospital leadership teams to reprioritise for the big pieces of work to really drive that compliance through. So multi-layered, I think, really, and a timescale around it. I think with most things for us at the moment, we've got, to cut some big turnaround probably within the next kind of 3 to 6 months, at least in the next quarters. We want to be monitoring that through the people affected groups locally and really start to see some traction and movement around it through the intervention of different types of delivery methods.
Yeah. So it's 12% of 1,400 people, ain't that many? And
about 160, 170.
And in some ways, if we can reaffirm, we can't say we have zero tolerance about this, and then on the other hand, not help people protect the time to do the training. We have another look at that. How that will work. 6 months feels a long time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we're working with them. So with other areas of projects that when we've looked at and we need intense turnaround, we'll do very intense interventions at level. So we'll ensure that we can reflect that and plan and work with the leadership teams to make sure that we get it. You're absolutely right, it's critical in numbers, thankfully, they're not too big, but still people on the receiving end of those obviously.
Yeah. So,
thank you. I can see the training need there, and it's a huge commitment to take on for the organisation to get that training in place to start. Is there any way it could be adapted and accommodated in the sort of online training you do for ESR?
Yeah.
Because there are some extraordinary training courses on there that I didn't think I'd ever see on ESR, but they are quite effective.
Yeah.
I just wonder if there's, because there are some clear messages to get over that would be easier and quicker.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We have to make sure that it kind of brings the behavioural change that we need, as well as ticking kind of the box that people have attended. But you're right, that's what Liverpool Women's do. They're a blended approach. So we're looking at using that, absolutely. And we also work very closely with partners like RASA, and they will give us capacity to be able to deliver training as well. So we just have to marry that up with people's internal capacity to be able to attend or complete online training. So yeah, we will look at those options and learn from even in.
But if we could person, whether out with the meeting or at the next meeting, to get an update on, we found better ways to increase the rate of life managed training. Okay, report received. Thank you. We're still with you for equality delivery system.
Thank you. So this final paper is for assurance for the board of directors, and it provides a summary of the outcome of the equality delivery system referred to through the paper as EDS. I'm just going to share a little bit of context, very brief context around it. So the EDS is a framework basically that helps NHS organisations improve services provided to local communities, but also the experience of staff within the organisation to ensure primarily that we improve working environments, improve equality, where they're free from discrimination for everybody basically who works in the NHS. EDS is a critical part of our cyclical annual plan and delivery. And it's a critical element of the ED&I commitments that the organisation's made. It's a very extensive piece of work. It takes a lot of multiple stakeholders to be able to deliver that and get their feedback. So it's a significant piece of work with multi-professional teams across both organisations and partner organisations who feed into it. Technically, there are 3 domains within EDS, and there's 11 outcomes that we get assessed against as organisations, and they're focused on the services that we provide, the health and safety, the health and well-being of our colleagues, and the inclusive leadership or the visibility of senior leaders in support of equity and inclusion as an agenda. So each of the domains are peer assessed. So our peer assessors this year were Merseycare and the Cheshire Mersey ACB ED&I lead. So they were the colleagues who supported us and took time to do that. And therefore, then this paper provides a look back and a review against those EDS kind of key domains and the progress that we've made to date. And then that then informs the action plans that are included within the appendix that colleagues will have been able to review. So I'm really pleased to confirm that even though there have been variances in each of the domains, both organisations have maintained their achieving rating for this year. So we've been rated as achieving in this year, which means there's a further step for us to be able to kind of progress towards to receive outstanding. So a summary of the key points from a domain 1 perspective, Liverpool Women's evaluated their family integrated care model, which is a neonatal unit, which basically works with parents to support them to participate really actively in their baby's care. And then Liverpool University Hospitals evaluated our respiratory virtual wards, and both organisations have committed to reviewing 3 services as we go into 25-26 for guidance due to some internal kind of challenges around capacity. And some alignment into kind of new kind of cycles of business and governance structures. Each of the organisations through this cycle just reported on 1 service. Okay, domain 2 looks at, so from a domain 2 perspective, this is relating to wellbeing, and both organisations were rated as continuing to strengthen their wellbeing offer for staff. You will see within the paper the implementation of annual health checks, the trauma-informed support service, caring services across Liverpool Women's and Luft around that, the introduction of flexible working options and condition-specific pathways, and local people plans and strategic areas of the people and culture programme will be a key area of focus. Wellbeing will feature very, very heavily in that as we go into next year, alongside belonging and all the other programmes of work that we'll be looking at. Domain 3 then, we received some really, really positive feedback around this, so thank you to members, executive members who contributed to this. This is relating to the inclusive leadership accountability, so staff networks. We saw colleagues this morning around our staff networks, and we are in a position to have executive sponsors for each of those. So that's a real positive and a real kind of movement from last year. And as we know, equality remains an agenda item on the board and committee meetings. Obviously, we're here today to talk about it. And we've just talked about the fact that the board workshop will be scheduled in the cycle of business for 2025 to further raise that awareness. There are some areas of improvement for us around visibility and kind of leadership accountability, relating primarily, you'll see in the actions around the quality impact assessments being routinely conducted, and further improvement really to monitor the mitigations, the actions, the sign-off and closing the cycle of. So you will see that reflected in the action plans across both organisations. So in summary, individual action plans and evaluations can be reviewed in the appendices that you will have seen. The submission, it is just to be noted that the submission of the paper and therefore then the publication of both EDS reports, we have passed the deadline of the 28th of February for the reasons I've mentioned. However, that is permitted if the board is cited and is supportive of a later publication of the reports. And just to give assurance around that, I've personally seen our now detailed plan, which outlines the 3 services per organisation. The plan for us to ensure that we meet the deadline for the 20th of February next year, and I feel sure that we've got a good plan in place to be able to kind of meet the deadline into next year. So, in summary, then the board are asked to receive the findings of the EDS kind of system review, and to approve the associated action plans that are included from both the Women's and from Luft, and to approve, therefore, then the publication of the EDS system to the group's external website.
Thank you. Lee Porter. Google require this point question. We can turn. Yeah. Good report. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good. Right. Move on to 2. First is the legislative scheme update and the maternity incentive scheme update.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully a straightforward paper. I'll just pull out some of the highlights. So just to remind people that we achieved the standards, all 10 standards in year 6, which meant that we're back on 10% of our maternity premium, which was £2 million. Similar figure for year 7, just over £2 million, equating to 10% of the maternity premium for clinical negligence. To note as well, I think we verbalised this last time, there were 18 out of the 120 trusts who did not achieve all 10 standards. We expect, as in previous years, that some of that premium is divvied out between the trusts that did. So we are potentially expecting some additional benefit from that on a non-recurrent basis, and that'll go some way towards supporting the birth rate plus investment on a non-recurrent basis in 25-26. All will be familiar with the birth rate plus requirements that are in the plan 25-26. For year 7, there are 10 safety actions, again very similar to previous years, The team have helpfully set out the key changes and how we were compliant against those in year 6. There are no areas of concern being flagged. And just to note as well, Safety Action 9, as I've raised in the Executive Managing Director's report, suggests delegation from the Trust Board can be done to an appropriate committee. What we would most likely do is include the perinatal dashboard as part of the IPR as well, so that people have sight on it, could ask any questions to the IPR on that key data update. So I'll pause there for any questions on the CNST before moving to perinatal.
Thank you. It's a good news story. That's done. Very good work. Very, very good. Questions? Yes, sorry, Sarah.
Just to underline that again for those NEDs that weren't as close to the women's, that the work and passion that the team have and the exemplary performance they've had now consistently for the last 4 years is remarkable. It's absolutely brilliant. So it's great to see that we're in such great shape again. I would just say I wouldn't want to lose sight of the details. So if that could form part of the IPR, I think it's important that we do retain that kind of oversight and the great. Yeah. Well,
Tracy, please.
And I would echo that. There's an awful lot of work done in and around that. That's fabulous. For year 7, I mean, in previous years, early on when we were doing this, clearly there were some risks identified at the beginning of the year and trying to achieve. It doesn't seem to be that there's quite as much concern about the year 7. So that's all goes well then.
I think given that it was only year 1 that we didn't achieve, and we've consistently achieved it between 2 and 6. I think it's so well embedded. And at this point in the year, we're so early in, we've got plans, things towards if we start to go off plan or we're not coming on trajectory later on in the year, that might highlight some risks that at the moment we are still confident.
David.
Thank you very much. I know that if Jackie Bird was here, she mentioned about her safety walkabouts, and she's been round. She continues to do that regularly and has mentioned that they remain very positive and successful. I've been round, I've done 2 visits in May around the Women's Hospital for various different things. And what struck me was how I don't know how this will come across, how very naturally staff were talking about the elements within CNST as part of business as usual. It wasn't we've got to mention ... It was just a normal conversation about improvements that they've made within practice and how the services have continued to develop, which is, I guess, that true sign, which I hope will be reflected with the CQC in their report.
Very, thank you. Okay. Sorry, Dave.
Thank you. It's really good report, and like David, when I've been around the Women's Hospital, I'm very impressed by the enthusiasm and the engagement of the staff. It's just when you're doing IPR going forward, you'll know that in the evidence required that they want the board minutes to record that midwifery staff are compliant with birth rate plus and so on. And I don't know whether we get that with our IPR at the moment, but that's really picking up and appropriately recording in the minutes, so we don't trip up on that bit of evidence that they require, because I know these where you have to provide evidence, people can become very pedantic about these things.
So I'll just come back on that. So that's reference to the perinatal dashboard, which, as you say, we can get through the IPR. I think our point is some of that delegation and the running through the birth rate cost will happen through the hospital management board, but we can escalate that through them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So if I go onto the perinatal dashboard, it's there for people to see. I'll just pull out a few key items just to remind the board that this dashboard or oversight report is post-Ockenden and utilises key safety metrics to help early identification of issues in the service. One-to-one care in labour was 99.77%. That represented 1 individual who did not receive care. This is during the birth stage in labour, and that was reviewed and no harm identified. There were 3 stillbirths, and as I reported earlier, adjusted to 5.32 per 1,000 birth. Again, all of those reviewed and no harm in terms of no further action required in terms of the intervention in those births. Midwifery sickness, I've pulled out previously in the executive managing director report, you can see is high at 6.5 compared to our target of 5% in midwifery. Also pleased to note we are still at 0% vacancy through the midwifery workforce, and nothing really else to pull out from there. So I'll just take questions. I should probably actually pull out though to further down in the table. Inductions of labour delays were 14%, which whilst we've had much higher numbers, we're just keeping an eye on in terms of those incidents where where there've been delays in induction of labour.
Okay, thank you. Questions, points, reflections? Content to receive the assured? Thank you. Well done, Jenny. I don't know how James and Dan will do this now as we go through the government section.
Last. Yes, okay. So last committee is straightforward to be frank. The papers there, the key things we discussed were around corporate service acceleration, where we demonstrated how the chief executive worked through a set of options or a suite of options as to why that needed to be done, and also a sort of preferential option for how we would approach it has gone back through the chief execs. There's a meeting on Monday of all of the executive teams and HLTs involved in LAS, where we'll be talking about that further and making a recommendation to the joint committee, which is in about 2 weeks' time. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
In relation to strategy and partnerships, details are there. One of the main things we've looked to reset the strategy and partnership committee of the board. We discussed the revised terms of reference. They're included in the pack for formal approval by the board today. We also received an update on the development of the UHLG 2030 strategy and some of the timeline around that. And obviously, we also talked about the work that's going on within the last committee as well, and the corporate services element. So obviously, a bit from that is just to make sure that we've got formal approval of the revisions to the terms of reference for that committee.
Thank you. We see them now and we've seen them before. We can tend to approve them. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. In relation to the provider license compliance, people will know that this is something that we have to submit a declaration on an annual basis. This is a requirement of our license conditions with NHS England, license condition 7, which is about continuity of services. This is basically about to ensure that the trust can demonstrate that there are services and governance in place to monitor service continuity. In relation to resources, it's both financial resources, but also the workforce resources to deal with it. This year, we've taken an approach where we've done the compliance for both organisations together, but obviously we've reviewed a lot of the evidence is similar, and the pack sets out the evidence for it. But also in making that compliance, we've also added some narrative detail, which we covered as part of some of the financial discussions that Rob referenced before. So we're submitting compliance for both organisations, but with a narrative section as well. So that, again, that needs board approval today.
Seek approval of the board, please. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. We move on to the LWH unitary governance. Jenny, you taking this one?
Yeah, I'll take the standing financial instructions and place the audit committee assurance report. So the SFI paper is here for approval. The changes are set out in the cover paper. It's been through the audit committee and charitable funds committees and comes for approval here. Just a bit of context. So as we became part of the group in November 24, we did a read across our standing financial instructions and the detail within both organisations and amended Liverpool Women's in line with Luft in terms of consistency. I think it's really important to point out that one of the challenges we gave ourselves when we were doing this was around materiality and the size of sign-offs, given that Liverpool Women's proportionally is a much smaller organisation than Luft, but still remains a statutory body with different audit materiality. So in the changes that went through the delegated authority, we concluded that whilst the executive managing director would have the same sign-off as the executive managing directors around the board table, the site-specific sign-offs would remain at their lower levels, number one, for audit purposes, and number two, for additional grip and control. So to give you that context ahead of approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Content. The audit committee, assurance report, Tracy.
Well, the audit committee, we've had it just previously before the last board, so I've sort of fed in verbally around it. So I think it's here as said. I think just two things. I think we've checked around how the year-end audit is going, and certainly throughout launch, I think seem to be progressing well. Should be obviously keeping in touch with that. And then last time we did actually highlight that there was a risk around the head of internal audit opinion from MIAA. We were worried that possibly it could dip below management moderate. Has been an awful lot of work being done in the last few weeks. And so thank you to Daniel and the governance team, Jenny and the team at LWH, and also to MIAA reviewing all the evidence, but we have actually got that back to a substantial assurance level, and that's how it would stay now for the year end. So that's good news. Feeling less grumpy this.
Very good to see. Thank you. Received? Thank you very much. I don't think Daniel's any new issues that have come out for the registration.
Just the stuff that we talked about before about the corporate report.
Yeah, yes, James.
And just to add to the minutes as well, that we noted the new urgent care plan, which may affect those still incorporate that.
Thank you. The questions that were raised in advance was dealt with by you, Jenny. Thank you. So I'll bring the meeting to a close. We thank again members of the public interest and attendance. We will pick up with part 2 of the meeting in 30 minutes at 12.
Thank you.
But 1:50. Thanks very much.